Hello and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're curled up in bed, lying on the couch, or gently swaying in a hammock somewhere far away, this video is your invitation to unwind. Tonight, we're taking a slow, soothing journey into the tiniest of places, deep inside your very own cells, to explore the mysterious and magnificent world of mitochondria. Now, I always aim for that perfect balance. Interesting enough to make your brain smile, but not so fascinating that it leaves you wide-eyed at 2 a.m. reciting ATP production stages. If it does keep you awake, I hope it's only because you're drifting down a rabbit hole of gentle curiosity, and maybe learning something lovely along the way. Before we begin, I'd be ever so grateful if you could give this video a like and maybe subscribe to the channel. It really helps me keep the lights on and the mitochondria happy. And while you're settling in, feel free to let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm always delighted to know where and when we're sharing this quiet corner of science together. This video is designed to be soft, slow and thoughtful. There will be no sudden noises or flashy transitions, just a calm stroll through the inner workings of life's tiniest engines. And as always, please remember that while we'll be talking a bit about health and biology, this video is purely for relaxation and educational purposes. It is not medical advice. With that said, let's begin. Let's start with a mitochondrion. Just one. It's small. Really small. Around 1 to 2 micrometers long. That's about 1/500th the width of a human hair. You could fit thousands of them into a single cell and you wouldn't even notice them with the naked eye. And yet without these tiny organelles you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be able to breathe, move, think or even blink. Life, as you know it, would quietly come to a halt. A mitochondrion, as you've likely heard before, is often called the powerhouse of the cell. It's a nickname that's been repeated in biology classrooms and on internet memes so many times that it's become a little cliché. But like many overused sayings, there's a solid truth underneath. Mitochondria do, quite literally, power your cells. But they are so much more than little cellular generators. They're ancient, strange, semi-autonomous, and, if you're willing to look closely, quietly brilliant. Every cell in your body that needs energy, which is almost all of them, relies on mitochondria to do the heavy lifting. Think of a muscle cell in your leg. It needs enormous amounts of energy to help you stand, walk, or run. So it's packed with mitochondria. A liver cell? Also energy hungry. Heart cells? Absolutely bursting with these tiny engines. Even brain cells, those delicate neurons that help you form memories and dreams, rely heavily on their mitochondria to keep things running smoothly. Now, let's take a closer look at what a mitochondrion actually is. First, imagine a sort of jelly bean-shaped blob, although the shape can vary depending on what kind of cell it's in. Mitochondria are flexible and dynamic, often changing shape and size depending on their workload. They can even move around within the cell, travel along little protein highways, and sometimes merge with one another or split apart like cellular amoebas, having a philosophical disagreement. Their outer surface is called the outer membrane. It's a smooth barrier that separates the inside of the mitochondrion from the rest of the cell. But don't let its simplicity fool you. This membrane is selective. It's equipped with proteins that help control what enters and exits the mitochondrion. It allows some things through, like small molecules and ions, but keeps others out. It's a bit like the doorman at a very exclusive energy club. Beneath that outer membrane is a second, highly folded inner membrane. This is where things get exciting. The folds are called cristae, and they dramatically increase the surface area inside the mitochondrion. If you were to take that inner membrane and unfold it, it would stretch out far longer than you might expect, like unravelling a ridiculously long piece of origami tucked into a bean. And the reason for all that folding is efficiency. The more surface area available, the more machinery the mitochondrion can pack in. It's like a tiny factory maximising its floor space for productivity. Between the two membranes lies a small space called the intermembrane space, and inside the inner membrane is the matrix. the gooey centre of the mitochondrion where some very important chemical reactions take place. The matrix is filled with enzymes, mitochondrial DNA, and ribosomes, all working together like a microscopic chemistry lab. It's warm, busy, and humming with quiet activity. And what, you may ask, is the mitochondrion actually doing in there? In the simplest terms, it's turning the food you eat and the oxygen you breathe into a form of energy your cells can use. It does this by producing a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. ATP is like the universal energy currency of life. It powers nearly every cellular process, from muscle contractions to nerve impulses to the creation of new molecules. If your cells were a tiny workforce, ATP would be their paycheck. But mitochondria don't just make ATP. They're involved in regulating calcium levels, managing cellular metabolism, and even helping to determine when a cell should self-destruct, a process known as apoptosis. Yes, your mitochondria can pull the plug when a cell is damaged beyond repair. Think of them as both the power plant and the emergency shutdown team. It's a big responsibility for such a tiny structure. Perhaps one of the most intriguing things about mitochondria is that they have their own DNA. That's right. Unlike most other organelles in your cells, mitochondria carry a small loop of genetic material that's entirely separate from the DNA found in your cell's nucleus. And not only that, but this DNA looks suspiciously bacterial. That's not a coincidence. Scientists believe that mitochondria are the descendants of free-living bacteria that were engulfed by early eukaryotic cells over 1 billion years ago. Instead of being digested, these bacteria formed a mutually beneficial relationship with their host. The host provided protection and nutrients, and the bacteria provided energy. Over time, this partnership became permanent. The bacteria evolved into mitochondria, and the host cells became the ancestors of all complex life on Earth. So in a way, every cell in your body is home to these ancient symbiotic survivors, foreign guests who moved in long ago and never left. And they brought their own instruction manual with them, one that still helps them function independently to this day. Now, while each mitochondrion contains its own DNA, it's not entirely self-sufficient. Over the course of evolution, most of its genes were transferred to the cell's nucleus. This means that mitochondria rely heavily on proteins that are made elsewhere in the cell and then shipped in. It's a bit like having a local kitchen that still depends on deliveries from headquarters to keep the menu running. And here's a fun fact. All the mitochondria in your body come from your mother. That's because when an egg is fertilized, the mitochondria from the sperm are usually destroyed or left behind, while the egg's mitochondria go on to populate the entire developing embryo. So, your mitochondrial lineage, traced through mitochondrial DNA, forms an unbroken maternal thread stretching back through countless generations. It's like a tiny biological keepsake passed from mother to child forever. But while mitochondria are often talked about as singular little units, they don't work in isolation. In fact, inside your cells, mitochondria form networks. They can fuse together to share resources and repair damage, or split apart when it's time to multiply or adapt. These networks are dynamic and responsive. They change based on the cell's energy needs, stress levels, and even the time of day. It's a bit like a group of co-workers who split up for solo projects but come together again when the big deadlines loom. What's more, mitochondria are surprisingly social within the microscopic world of the cell. They communicate with other organelles, send signals, and help coordinate complex responses to changes in the environment. When the cell is under stress, say from heat, lack of nutrients, or oxidative damage, mitochondria are often the first to respond. They alter their behavior, shift their energy output, and even send warning signals to the nucleus, like little cellular early warning systems. So when you think about mitochondria, don't just think about them as tiny batteries. Think about them as flexible, intelligent energy hubs with ancient origins and a vital role in nearly every aspect of your biology. They're the unseen symphony beneath your skin, conducting life with a quiet hum of electrons and enzymes, fold by fold, breath by breath. And all of this is happening in the background right now as you lie still, relaxing, just breathing. Your cells are glowing quietly with the work of billions of these tiny powerhouses. They're not flashy, they're not loud, but they are always there, always on, always working, so that you don't have to think about it at all. Let's take a moment to appreciate something you've probably never seen, but that your body produces more than its weight in every single day: adenosine triphosphate, or ATP for short. If the word sounds like something out of a sci-fi manual, don't worry. You don't need to memorize the name. Just know this: ATP is the molecule your body uses as its universal energy currency. It is quite literally what keeps your lights on. Your muscles move because of it. Your brain fires because of it. Your heart keeps beating thanks to the ceaseless flow of ATP, like a silent stream of energy flowing through every cell. Now here's the truly staggering part. Each one of your cells makes and uses somewhere between 10 million and 100 million ATP molecules every second. That's not a typo. Every second. Multiply that by the trillions of cells in your body, and you begin to realize that your internal power grid is not just active. It's absolutely humming with microscopic energy transactions. If your body were a city, ATP would be the electricity running through every street lamp, coffee machine, and elevator. And where does most of this ATP come from? You guessed it, mitochondria. While some ATP is made outside the mitochondria through a process called glycolysis, which happens in the cytoplasm, the bulk of it, around 90% or more, is produced inside those tiny bean-shaped organelles. This process is called cellular respiration, and while that might sound like something your lungs do, it actually happens at the molecular level. Let's break down how this miraculous energy-making operation works in the gentlest way possible. No pop quizzes, no diagrams to memorize, just a slow stroll through the chemistry of life. First, imagine you've just eaten a banana, or a piece of toast, or maybe a slice of chocolate cake, depending on the kind of day you're having. That food gets broken down in your digestive system into smaller molecules, including glucose, a simple sugar. Glucose is like a bundle of energy-packed carbon atoms, and your body loves it. Once glucose is in your bloodstream, it travels to your cells, where the real magic begins. Step 1 is glycolysis. This takes place in the cytoplasm, which is the jelly-like fluid that fills the inside of cells. Glycolysis breaks one molecule of glucose, a chain of 6 carbon atoms, into 2 smaller molecules called pyruvate, each with 3 carbon atoms. It's like snapping a glow stick in half. In the process, a small amount of ATP is made, along with some molecules called NADH, that act as energy carriers. Now those 2 pyruvate molecules enter the mitochondrion. This is where the real energy harvest begins. Inside the mitochondrion, the pyruvate undergoes further processing in a series of steps known as the citric acid cycle, also charmingly called the Krebs cycle, named after Sir Hans Krebs, who described it in the 1930s. The cycle occurs in the mitochondrial matrix, the gooey center we explored earlier. Here, the carbon atoms from the pyruvate are stripped away, and in the process, more NADH and another carrier molecule called FADH2 are produced. Think of these molecules as tiny mail carriers, each one carrying a high-energy message destined for the mitochondrian's inner membrane. This is where the final and most dramatic stage happens, the electron transport chain. Now, this isn't a physical chain, like something you'd use to tie up a bicycle. It's a series of protein complexes embedded in the inner membrane of the mitochondrion. These proteins act like conveyor belts, passing along electrons that were carried by NADH and FADH2. As the electrons move down the chain, they release energy, and this energy is used to pump protons, tiny positively charged particles, across the membrane into the intermembrane space. This creates something called a proton gradient, which is a fancy way of saying there are now a lot more protons on one side of the membrane than the other. Nature does not like imbalance, and these protons desperately want to flow back into the matrix where they came from. They do this by passing through a special protein called ATP synthase. It's often described as a molecular turbine, because it quite literally spins as protons rush through it. With each turn of the turbine, ATP is produced from a molecule called ADP by adding one more phosphate group. And just like that, energy is made. This whole beautiful process is known as oxidative phosphorylation. It might sound complicated, and in a biochemical sense it is, but the overall idea is remarkably elegant. Your mitochondria take in fuel from your food and oxygen from the air you breathe, run them through a series of spinning molecular machines, and output ATP, tiny packets of usable energy. The process is efficient, coordinated, and happens continuously in every cell without you ever having to think about it. But there's something even more incredible about all this: the efficiency. Each molecule of glucose, when fully processed through cellular respiration, can yield around 30 to 32 ATP molecules. That's a pretty good return on investment for something as small as a sugar molecule. And remember, this is happening millions of times per second across trillions of cells. Your body is a biochemical symphony, with mitochondria conducting the music of life one molecule at a time. Of course, nothing in biology is ever perfect. Alongside ATP, mitochondria also produce byproducts. One of these is carbon dioxide, which is eventually exhaled from your lungs. Another is heat, which helps keep your body at a nice cozy temperature, even on chilly nights. And then there are reactive oxygen species, or ROS, which are chemically reactive molecules that can damage cellular structures if not properly managed. But more on those later. Right now, let's return to the ATP itself. Think of ATP as a rechargeable battery. It has 3 phosphate groups attached to a central structure, and the bonds between those phosphate groups store energy. When the cell needs to use that energy, say, to contract a muscle or move a molecule, it breaks one of those phosphate bonds, turning ATP into ADP, or adenosine diphosphate. The energy released from this break powers the cell's action, and then the ADP can be recycled back into ATP by adding a phosphate group again through cellular respiration. It's a clean, efficient loop, almost like returning your battery to the charging dock after each use. This constant cycle of ATP usage and replenishment is so vital that if ATP production stopped, your body would begin to shut down in a matter of minutes. That might sound dramatic, but it's true. Cells are always on the move, always in need of energy, and without ATP there's no backup plan. It's the one molecule they absolutely cannot do without. Interestingly, some cells have different ATP needs depending on what they do. Red blood cells, for example, don't even have mitochondria. They rely entirely on glycolysis for their energy needs. But muscle cells, particularly in the heart and skeletal muscles, are packed with mitochondria because their energy demands are enormous. And brain cells, also bursting with them. Your brain may only weigh about 3 pounds, but it uses about 20% of your body's total energy. That's a lot of ATP just to think, dream and remember where you left your keys. So the next time you feel a heartbeat, take a breath, or even blink, you can thank your mitochondria. These little factories are working around the clock, producing the currency of life molecule by molecule. It's easy to forget just how much is going on inside you at any given moment. But every movement, every thought, every gentle sigh is powered by a symphony of ATP, spun into being by the tireless work of mitochondria. And perhaps what's most amazing is that all of this is happening silently, invisibly, without any need for your conscious attention. You don't have to understand the electron transport chain, or remember the name of every enzyme involved. Your cells already know the choreography. All you have to do is be here, alive and breathing, while the microscopic machinery hums along just beneath the surface. If that isn't quietly extraordinary, I don't know what is. If you've ever looked at a mitochondrion under a microscope, assuming of course that you've got access to a very powerful one and an unusual idea of a fun Friday night, you'll notice something curious. Unlike most little blobs inside a cell, mitochondria are not just simple spheres or shapeless sacs. They're full of folds, elegant, squiggly, purposeful folds. These folds are not just for show, they are the inner membrane of the mitochondrion, and they form intricate structures called cristae. These cristae are one of nature's cleverest space-saving hacks. Imagine trying to cram an entire blanket into a shoebox. If you roll it neatly and tuck it just so, you can fit a surprising amount inside. That's essentially what the mitochondrion does. It takes its highly important inner membrane and folds it over and over again to pack in as much functional surface area as possible. Why does this matter? Because those folds are where the real magic happens. But before we dive too deep into that, let's zoom out and look at the basic anatomy of a mitochondrion one more time. A mitochondrion has two membranes, an outer membrane and an inner membrane. These two layers create two distinct spaces, the intermembrane space, which lies between the membranes, and the mitochondrial matrix, which is the gooey core in the centre. The outer membrane is fairly relaxed in terms of security. It lets many small molecules pass through quite freely, thanks to special proteins called porins that act like gateways. It's kind of like the front door of a house that always stays unlocked, allowing in anything that looks reasonably harmless. It separates the inside of the mitochondrion from the cytoplasm of the cell, but doesn't do much in the way of specialized filtering. The inner membrane, though, that's where things get sophisticated. Unlike the outer membrane, the inner membrane is highly selective. It doesn't just let anything waltz in. Instead, it controls the passage of ions, molecules, and proteins with impressive precision. It's dotted with specialized transporters and protein complexes that carefully manage the import and export of key molecules. And most importantly, this is where the electron transport chain lives. Yes, that all-important sequence of protein complexes we met earlier, the one responsible for generating ATP, lives along these folds. The cristae dramatically increase the amount of inner membrane surface area, which means more space for those crucial protein complexes and more capacity for producing ATP. If the inner membrane were flat and unremarkable, a mitochondrion would be far less efficient. But thanks to the cristae, a single mitochondrion can house thousands of copies of the molecular machines needed for respiration. In fact, the more energy a cell needs, the more folded its mitochondrial inner membranes tend to be. Muscle cells, especially those in the heart, have mitochondria with intensely folded inner membranes to meet their high energy demands. The structure of these folds isn't random either. They're not just messy creases in an overworked organelle. The architecture of the cristae is tightly regulated. In fact, their shape can influence how well the mitochondrion functions. Too few folds, and the organelle won't be able to meet the energy demands of the cell. Too many, and things get cramped and dysfunctional. It's a delicate balance, carefully maintained. This idea, that form follows function, is a recurring theme in biology, and mitochondria are a perfect example. Their structure has evolved not for aesthetics, but for efficiency. Everything about their design serves a purpose. The cristae provide anchoring points for the electron transport chain, an ATP synthase. You can think of the electron transport chain as a kind of conveyor belt, passing along electrons and using the energy released to pump protons across the membrane. These protons then flow back through ATP synthase, which is often described as a molecular turbine spinning to generate ATP. The tighter the cristae are folded, the closer these components can be to one another. This proximity speeds up the reactions, reduces the loss of intermediates, and allows for better regulation. It's a bit like having all your kitchen tools arranged within arm's reach when cooking. You don't have to run across the room to grab a spatula. It's right there, ready to go. But the structure of the inner membrane does more than just facilitate energy production. It also helps with the separation of ions, particularly protons, during the creation of the electrochemical gradient. This gradient is essential for driving ATP synthesis, and the membrane's impermeability to protons is what makes it work. If the inner membrane were leaky, the entire system would collapse like a souffle in a thunderstorm. Interestingly, the shape and number of cristae can change depending on the cell's activity. When a cell is working hard, say, a muscle cell during exercise, the mitochondria can adjust their inner membrane structure to be more efficient. This adaptability is another reason why mitochondria are so special. They don't just sit there churning out ATP. They're responsive, dynamic organelles that react to what the body needs in real time, but they can also get tired or damaged. When mitochondria are exposed to too much stress, whether from toxins, disease, or aging, the structure of their inner membranes can degrade. The folds may flatten, the proteins may become less organized, and the whole system becomes less efficient. It's one of the ways our cells show signs of wear and tear over time. And here's something rather poetic. Mitochondria aren't static. They move around the cell, changing shape, fusing with one another or splitting apart in a process known as mitochondrial dynamics. When two mitochondria fuse, they can mix their contents, including proteins and even mitochondrial DNA. This allows them to share resources, dilute damage, and maintain functionality. On the flip side, when mitochondria divide, they can segregate damaged areas and send them off to be broken down and recycled. This ability to change, both in shape and in internal structure, is one of the keys to their longevity and versatility. The folds of the inner membrane may seem like a minor detail, but they are central to everything the mitochondrion does. Without those folds, without that increased surface area, ATP production would be painfully inefficient. Your heart would tire easily, your brain would feel foggy, and your body would struggle to maintain its delicate balance. It's fascinating to think that something as small as a fold could have such a huge impact. But that's the beauty of biology. Sometimes the tiniest structures carry the greatest significance. Let's also pause for a moment to appreciate just how unusual it is for an organelle to have two membranes. Most structures inside the cell are enclosed by a single membrane, but mitochondria, with their outer and inner layers, are an exception. This dual membrane setup is another clue pointing to their ancient origin as free-living bacteria. Bacteria often have two membranes, and when one of them was engulfed by a larger host cell eons ago, it brought both layers along for the ride. And so, to this day, the mitochondrion remains a kind of cellular time capsule, an ancient remnant of a once independent life form, folded neatly into the fabric of our biology. Its inner membrane, with all its delicate loops and layers, is not just a structural feature, it's a living relic of evolutionary history, a whisper from the deep past, folded and refolded into every heartbeat and breath. So next time you think of mitochondria, don't just imagine a tiny bean with vague energy-making powers. Picture a living labyrinth of folded membranes, each one humming with activity, each fold a platform for the molecular dance of life. It's a reminder that within us, even the smallest structures are marvels of design, beautiful, intricate, and always working behind the scenes. Let's go back, way back, not just a few generations or a few centuries or even to the dinosaurs. Let's go back about 2 billion years, give or take a few 100 million. The Earth at this time was a very different place. It was teeming with microscopic life, but not a single tree, no birds, no flowers, no humans, just a stew of simple cells drifting through ancient oceans, living their best single-celled lives. Among these primitive cells were two major groups, the archaea, which are kind of like bacteria's weirder cousins, and the bacteria themselves, which had been around for billions of years and were very good at surviving just about anything. But something strange, something extraordinary, was about to happen. Somewhere in those prehistoric waters, a large blob-like cell swallowed a smaller bacterium. Now, normally, this would have been the end of the story for the little guy. Dinner is served. One gulp, one digestive process, one happy single-celled predator. But not this time. For reasons we'll never fully know, the larger cell didn't digest the bacterium. Instead, it held on to it. The little bacterium took up residence inside the host cell, and instead of breaking down or being destroyed, it started helping out. It was good at converting nutrients into energy, really good, And so, in this moment of microscopic mercy, a partnership was born. This event is known as the endosymbiosis theory, endo meaning within, and symbiosis meaning living together. The basic idea is simple, but profound. Mitochondria are the descendants of free-living bacteria that were engulfed by early eukaryotic cells and eventually became permanent residents. What started as a chance encounter led to one of the most important evolutionary developments in the history of life. You might be wondering how we know this. After all, it's not like those cells left behind fossils. But they did leave behind clues, tiny molecular fingerprints that still exist in our cells today. First, and perhaps most importantly, mitochondria have their own DNA, not nuclear DNA, the kind stored in the cell's nucleus, but a separate loop of genetic material tucked away inside each mitochondrion. This DNA is small, circular, and looks suspiciously like bacterial DNA. That's clue number one. Second, mitochondria have two membranes. That's unusual. Most organelles in a cell have just one, but bacteria often have two membranes, and when one is engulfed by another cell, it brings both membranes along for the ride. That double-layered structure is another big clue. Third, mitochondria replicate on their own. They don't wait for the cell to divide. They can divide independently, through a process called binary fission. That's the same method bacteria use to reproduce. Each mitochondrion can copy itself and split into two, just like its ancient ancestors did billions of years ago. And finally, when scientists compare the genetic sequences of mitochondrial DNA to other organisms, they find that mitochondria are most closely related to a specific group of bacteria known as alpha proteobacteria. This genetic similarity isn't just close, it's like comparing a handwritten letter to a typed one and realizing they came from the same author. Taken together, these clues paint a compelling picture. Long ago, a bacterium became a houseguest, then a roommate, then a business partner, and eventually a permanent fixture. Over time, the host cell and its internal lodger became so interconnected that neither could survive without the other. The bacterium gave up most of its independence, transferring many of its genes to the host cell's nucleus, and in return, it gained protection, nutrients, and a stable home. This unlikely partnership was the spark that led to all complex life. Before this event, cells were simple. No nuclei, no internal compartments, no mitochondria. But after endosymbiosis, things changed. Cells became more efficient. They had a built-in energy factory which allowed them to grow larger, process more information, and develop greater complexity. This was the beginning of the eukaryotic cell, the kind of cell that makes up all plants, animals, fungi, and protists. In essence, you are powered by a 2-billion-year-old merger. The cells in your body are not just descendants of single-celled organisms, they are the result of ancient teamwork. You are, in a very real sense, a walking alliance. This kind of symbiosis, where one organism lives inside another and both benefit, is not unheard of in biology. But endosymbiosis is in a league of its own. It didn't just help one species, it reshaped the tree of life. Before mitochondria, cells could only get so big and do so much. After mitochondria, evolution could take its time building increasingly complex structures. Cells with organelles, tissues, organs, entire organisms. In fact, every eukaryotic organism on Earth, every tree, every bird, every jellyfish, every human, is a product of that original symbiotic event. Mitochondria are the great enablers, the unsung heroes of evolution. And their story didn't stop there. As mitochondria continued to evolve, they developed new functions. They became involved not just in energy production, but in calcium signaling, cell death, heat generation, and more. Their integration into the host cell wasn't just tolerated, it was embraced, expanded, and refined over billions of years. But the ancient origins of mitochondria are still there, written into every fold of their membranes and every twist of their DNA. When scientists want to study deep evolutionary history, they often turn to mitochondria. Because mitochondrial DNA is relatively small and mutates at a steady rate, it acts like a molecular clock. By comparing mitochondrial DNA sequences across different species, researchers can estimate how long ago those species diverged from a common ancestor. There's also something poetic about the fact that mitochondria are passed down almost exclusively through the mother's line. When an egg is fertilized, the mitochondria in the sperm are typically destroyed, meaning that all of the mitochondria in your body came from your mother and her mother's mother, going back for countless generations. Your mitochondrial DNA is a living thread connecting you to the distant past. Imagine that. Every heartbeat you feel, every breath you take, every sleepy blink, powered by the descendants of ancient bacteria that decided billions of years ago to cooperate rather than compete. It's a comforting thought, in a way, that deep within each of your cells is a relic of life's earliest collaborations, humming quietly, doing its job without complaint. And perhaps that's one of the great lessons of mitochondria, that sometimes progress doesn't come from competition or conquest, but from connection, from merging, sharing, and growing together. The mitochondrion is not just a biological curiosity, it's a monument to cooperation. So the next time you hear the phrase powerhouse of the cell, remember that behind those simple words lies a story of ancient oceans, microscopic diplomacy, and the long, slow march toward complexity. The mitochondrion is a time traveller from life's earliest days, still alive inside you, still doing what it does best, turning the spark of chemistry into the miracle of being alive. If you were to shrink yourself down to a microscopic size and hop aboard a mitochondrion, you'd notice something peculiar. Unlike most of the organelles floating around inside your cells, the mitochondrion doesn't just look different, it behaves differently. It carries its own unique instructions, tucked away in a tiny circle of genetic material, completely separate from the cell's main library of DNA. This circle is known as mitochondrial DNA, and it's one of the strangest, most fascinating things about these tiny powerhouses. Most of the genetic material in your cells lives inside the nucleus, the big central hub that acts like a master archive. The nucleus contains all the instructions needed to make you, from the colour of your eyes to the shape of your nose to how your cells should grow, divide and respond to the world. But the mitochondria? They have their own miniature instruction manual. It's shorter, more compact and written in an older dialect, but it's theirs, and it tells an ancient story. Mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA for short, is circular, just like the DNA found in bacteria. That alone is a big clue about their ancestry. In most cells, DNA is linear, neatly wound into chromosomes, but in mitochondria, it loops around like a biological bracelet, echoing its bacterial past. It's a bit like finding a handwritten recipe card from your great-great-grandmother, still being used in your kitchen today. Each mitochondrion contains several copies of this circular DNA, and each cell can have hundreds or even thousands of mitochondria, depending on its energy needs. That means a single cell might have tens of thousands of copies of mitochondrial DNA quietly humming along. It's a remarkably robust little system, especially for something so small. Now you might be wondering, what does mitochondrial DNA actually do? Well, mitochondrial DNA contains the instructions for making 13 proteins that are essential for the mitochondrian's role in energy production. These proteins are part of the machinery that drives the electron transport chain, the critical series of reactions that generate ATP. In addition to these 13 proteins, mitochondrial DNA also codes for 22 transfer RNAs and 2 ribosomal RNAs, all of which are needed to help build those proteins right there inside the mitochondrion. That might not sound like much, and in truth, it isn't. 13 proteins is a very modest portfolio. In comparison, the human nuclear genome codes for more than 20,000 genes. So why does the mitochondrion hang on to these few? One theory is that these particular proteins are so closely involved in the actual energy production process that it's beneficial to produce them locally, right where they're needed. Shipping them in from the nucleus would take more time and create unnecessary complexity. By keeping a few key instructions on site, the mitochondrion can respond quickly to the cell's changing energy demands. It's like having an emergency manual on hand rather than stored in a filing cabinet across the building. But it wasn't always just 13 genes. Originally, when the mitochondrion was still a free-living bacterium, it would have had hundreds or even thousands of genes. Over billions of years, most of those genes migrated into the host cell's nucleus, leaving behind only the essentials. It was a long, slow transfer, like moving house one piece of furniture at a time. This gene migration helped tie the mitochondrion more tightly to its host, making the partnership even more permanent. What's truly fascinating is that the mitochondrial genome is inherited in a completely different way from the nuclear genome. While nuclear DNA comes from both parents, half from the mother and half from the father, mitochondrial DNA comes almost exclusively from the mother. When an egg is fertilized by a sperm, the egg contributes not just its nucleus, but also all the mitochondria that will go on to populate the embryo. The sperm, on the other hand, contributes very little cytoplasm, and its mitochondria are usually destroyed or degraded shortly after fertilization. So in a sense, your mitochondrial DNA is a direct maternal inheritance. It came from your mother, who got it from her mother, and so on, stretching back through countless generations. This unbroken chain of maternal inheritance is why scientists can use mitochondrial DNA to trace maternal ancestry across centuries. There's even a term for the most recent common ancestor of all living humans on their maternal side, Mitochondrial Eve. Now, Mitochondrial Eve was not the only woman alive in her time, but she is the woman whose mitochondrial DNA was successfully passed down through the generations to all people alive today. Through careful analysis of mitochondrial DNA variations across different populations, researchers can piece together a kind of genetic travelogue, mapping out how ancient humans migrated across the globe. Because mitochondrial DNA mutates at a relatively steady rate, it acts like a molecular clock. These mutations, tiny changes in the DNA sequence, accumulate slowly over time. By comparing these changes between individuals and populations, scientists can estimate how long ago they shared a common ancestor. It's like reading tree rings, but at the molecular level. This ability to trace ancestry has opened up incredible windows into our past. It's helped researchers understand the timing and roots of ancient migrations, the relationships between different human populations, and even the interbreeding events between modern humans and extinct relatives like the Neanderthals. And it all comes down to those little loops of DNA spinning away inside your mitochondria. But mitochondrial DNA isn't just useful for historians. It also plays a role in medicine. Because mitochondria are so vital to energy production, any mutations in mitochondrial DNA can have serious consequences. Mitochondrial diseases are a group of rare genetic disorders caused by defects in the mitochondrial genome. These conditions can affect organs and tissues that require a lot of energy, like the brain, muscles, and heart. What makes these diseases particularly complex is that each cell contains many mitochondria, and not all of them may carry the mutation. This leads to a phenomenon called heteroplasmy, where some mitochondria are healthy and some are faulty. The ratio of normal to mutated mitochondria can vary from one tissue to another and can influence how severe the symptoms are. Because mitochondrial DNA is passed down maternally, these conditions often run in maternal family lines. If a woman carries a mitochondrial mutation, she can pass it on to all of her children. However, only her daughters will continue to pass it on to the next generation. It's a very different inheritance pattern from what we see with most genetic conditions. Despite their small size and limited genetic content, mitochondria have an outsized influence on health. Researchers are exploring ways to prevent or treat mitochondrial diseases, including techniques like mitochondrial replacement therapy, which involves replacing defective mitochondria in an egg with healthy ones from a donor. This method has been nicknamed the three-parent baby technique and is still highly experimental, but it offers a glimpse into the potential future of genetic medicine. Of course, tinkering with mitochondrial DNA also raises a host of ethical questions. Because the mitochondrial genome is passed down through generations, any changes made could be inherited by future descendants. That's a weighty responsibility. As with any form of genetic editing, the science must be paired with careful thought, rigorous oversight, and plenty of open conversation. But stepping back from the cutting edge for a moment, it's worth reflecting on how amazing it is that you carry an ancient strand of bacterial DNA inside nearly every cell of your body. That you are in part powered by a system that predates multicellular life. That your cells still honour a partnership forged in the oceans of early Earth, with instructions scribbled in circular code and handed down from mother to child like a secret family recipe. Your mitochondrial DNA isn't just a collection of letters. It's a living document, a molecular passport, a relic of your deepest ancestry, and a record of life's persistence. And it's still there, tucked into the folds of your cells, quietly guiding the dance of molecules, energy, and time. If you were to make a list of things that change the world forever, you might jot down fire, language, or maybe even sliced bread. But long before humans figured out how to toast anything, something else lit the spark of transformation. It was tiny, ancient, and didn't care about your lunch. Yet it changed everything. It was mitochondria. At first glance, mitochondria don't look particularly world-changing. They're small, bean-shaped, and tucked away inside your cells like shy background characters in the movie of life. But their role in evolution? That was anything but minor. In fact, it's fair to say that without mitochondria, complex life as we know it would not exist at all. To understand why, let's go back to the early days of life on Earth. We're talking about billions of years ago, when the only living things were simple, single-celled organisms, mostly bacteria and archaea. These cells were efficient in their own minimalist way. They absorbed nutrients, reproduced, and made just enough energy to survive. But they were limited. You see, there's only so much a single-celled organism can do when it has to do everything itself. Without internal compartments or special structures, it's hard to grow big, specialize, or get fancy. Then, something happened. A new kind of cell emerged, the eukaryotic cell. These cells were bigger, more complex, and organized into compartments called organelles. And one of the most important of these organelles was the mitochondrion. This was the game changer. The addition of mitochondria allowed cells to generate energy far more efficiently than they could before. And that energy, well, it opened the floodgates to everything that came after. To appreciate how significant this is, let's do a bit of biological bookkeeping. Simple cells without mitochondria rely on a process called fermentation, or anaerobic respiration to generate energy. It's not a bad system, but it's kind of like trying to power a city using only hand-cranked generators. You get some energy, but it's limited, and you'll be exhausted trying to keep up. Now introduce mitochondria. Suddenly cells could use oxygen to extract much more energy from each molecule of glucose. This is known as aerobic respiration, and it's like switching from a hand crank to a high-efficiency power grid. The energy yield is spectacular. Roughly 15 times more ATP per glucose molecule compared to anaerobic processes. That's the kind of upgrade that doesn't just improve life, it transforms it. With this new energy surplus, cells could afford to get ambitious. They could grow bigger, develop internal structures, and start specializing. Some cells became better at movement, others at digestion, others at sensing their environment. Eventually, some cells even started working together, forming the first multicellular organisms, and from there, plants, animals, fungi, sea slugs, and everything else that crawls, swims, blooms, or blinks. In essence, mitochondria didn't just power cells, they powered evolution. They were the fuel behind the biological renaissance. Let's put this into perspective. A typical eukaryotic cell can be over 10,000 times the volume of a bacterial cell. That's a massive increase in size, and with it comes complexity. But more size also means more energy demands. Without mitochondria, cells couldn't sustain that kind of complexity. The math just wouldn't work. And it's not just about size. Complexity means more proteins to build, more DNA to manage, more waste to clean up, and more communication between parts of the cell. All of that requires energy. A lot of it. Mitochondria gave cells the budget to do all these things and more. They turned biology from a one-room cabin into a sprawling multi-level mansion. Some scientists go even further and argue that mitochondria were the key requirement for the evolution of intelligence. After all, the human brain is a notorious energy hog. It makes up only about 2% of your body weight, but it uses around 20% of your resting energy supply. That's a lot of ATP just to think, dream, and occasionally forget where you put your phone. Without mitochondria providing that energy, a brain like ours simply wouldn't be possible. Neurons are incredibly active cells, firing electrical signals, maintaining ion gradients, recycling neurotransmitters, and more. All of which takes energy. It's no wonder that neurons are packed with mitochondria. In fact, if you looked closely at a single nerve cell, you'd find mitochondria lining up along the axons like workers along a conveyor belt powering every thought and twitch. This idea, that energy-enabled complexity, isn't just a biological footnote. It's central to understanding how life evolved from the simple to the spectacular. Energy is often the limiting factor in evolution. You can't build bigger, more intricate structures unless you have the resources to support them. Mitochondria gave life that energy headroom, and it's not just about humans. Plants too owe a lot to mitochondria. Even though plants generate their own energy through photosynthesis, their cells still rely on mitochondria to handle the heavy lifting when it comes to respiration, especially at night when there's no sunlight. Fungi, amoebas, jellyfish, whales, they all depend on mitochondria in one way or another. It's a truly universal partnership. What's even more fascinating is how mitochondria may have helped shape not just individual organisms, but entire ecosystems. By enabling cells to process oxygen efficiently, mitochondria helped organisms survive and thrive in an increasingly oxygen-rich atmosphere. This changed the composition of life on Earth and helped establish the dominance of aerobic organisms. And let's not forget reproduction. Mitochondria play a quiet but essential role in the energy-intensive process of cell division. Whether you're growing new skin, healing a cut, or developing from a single fertilized egg into a full-grown human, mitochondria are there, churning out the energy needed to build and rebuild the body. Even the way mitochondria divide, through a process called fission, is a throwback to their bacterial ancestors. This allows mitochondria to multiply within a cell when energy demand goes up. If a cell needs more power, it simply makes more mitochondria. And if a mitochondrion gets damaged or worn out, it can be broken down and recycled in a process called mitophagy. This self-regulation keeps the system efficient and adaptable. Some researchers have even proposed that mitochondrial function plays a role in determining the pace of aging and lifespan. That's still an open area of investigation, but it wouldn't be surprising. After all, if mitochondria are the engines of the cell, then how well they run, how cleanly they burn fuel, how well they repair themselves, could very well determine how long the larger machine lasts. And yet, despite all this, mitochondria are still often treated as a biology trivia item, just another label to memorize. Powerhouse of the cell. But that phrase barely scratches the surface. It doesn't capture the grandeur of what mitochondria represent. They are ancient immigrants, energy whisperers, evolutionary catalysts. They are the engines of progress, humming away in the background while the stage lights shine elsewhere. So the next time you marvel at the complexity of life, the grace of a bird in flight, the depth of a forest ecosystem, the architecture of a coral reef, or even just the quiet miracle of your own beating heart, remember the mitochondria. Remember that at the root of all that complexity is a tiny organelle, born of ancient cooperation, still pulsing with the power to make life not just possible, but extraordinary. Let's imagine for a moment that your body is a bustling city. Streets, highways, construction crews, delivery vans, everything moving and working in concert. But beneath all that activity, there's something even more essential: energy management. Every part of the city needs electricity, fuel, water pressure, and temperature control. Without it, the whole place shuts down. Inside your body, that responsibility falls to the mitochondria, not just as energy producers, but as regulators, managers, and even crisis response teams. And one of their most important duties is running your metabolism. Now, metabolism is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot. People talk about it as if it's a personality trait. I have a fast metabolism, someone might say, usually while eating a double cheeseburger with fries and not gaining a single ounce. But metabolism isn't just a speed dial on your weight. It's the full, continuous set of chemical reactions that keeps you alive, transforming the food you eat into the energy your cells can use. Your mitochondria are at the heart of that process. Think of every cell as a little factory. Raw materials come in, nutrients like glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids, and products go out like ATP, carbon dioxide, water, and heat. The mitochondria are the power plant within that factory. They decide how to use those materials, how much energy to produce, and when to ramp things up or slow them down. They don't just respond to your body's energy needs, they anticipate them. Let's take glucose as an example. When you eat something carb-rich, maybe a warm slice of toast or a spoonful of honey, glucose floods your bloodstream. This sugar molecule is a favourite fuel for your cells, and your mitochondria are happy to use it. The glucose gets broken down through glycolysis in the cytoplasm, forming pyruvate, which then enters the mitochondria for further processing. But what if you're not eating much glucose? Maybe you're fasting, or on a low-carb diet. Well, your mitochondria can adapt. They switch to burning fatty acids instead, drawing from the fat stored in your body. This process, called beta oxidation, allows mitochondria to squeeze energy out of fat molecules and keep your cells humming along, even when carbs are scarce. This flexibility is a key feature of mitochondrial function. They don't rely on just one type of fuel. Like a hybrid car that can run on gas or electricity, mitochondria are metabolic generalists. They can use carbs, fats, and even protein-derived amino acids in a pinch, depending on what's available and what your body needs. Now, how do they decide what to use and when? That's where the real brilliance of mitochondrial metabolism comes in. Inside your cells, there are dozens of signaling pathways, chemical messages zipping around to tell the mitochondria what's going on. If you're exercising, those signals will push mitochondria to increase ATP production. If you're resting, they'll dial things down. If you're cold, they might ramp up a process called thermogenesis, which generates heat to help keep your body warm. One of the most fascinating examples of this is brown fat. Unlike the more familiar white fat, which stores energy, brown fat's main job is to burn energy to produce heat. Babies have a lot of brown fat to help them stay warm, and adults retain some too, especially in areas like the neck and upper back. What makes brown fat special is its mitochondria. They're packed with a protein called UCP1, or uncoupling protein 1, which allows protons to leak across the inner mitochondrial membrane without producing ATP. Instead of making energy packets, the mitochondria in brown fat just release the energy as heat. It's like running a generator without collecting the electricity, just using it to warm the room. This ability to produce heat without shivering is called non-shivering thermogenesis, and it's one of the clever ways your body can maintain its internal temperature. Mitochondria also help regulate a broader metabolic concept known as energy balance. Your body is constantly juggling energy input and output. When you eat, energy comes in. When you move, breathe, think, or even sleep, energy goes out. Mitochondria help manage this delicate balance, but they don't work alone. They take cues from hormones like insulin and glucagon. When you eat and your blood sugar rises, insulin is released. This hormone tells cells to absorb glucose, and mitochondria respond by stepping up energy production. When you haven't eaten for a while, glucagon comes into play, encouraging the body to release stored energy, and again, the mitochondria shift gears accordingly. They're also influenced by thyroid hormones, which set the overall speed of your metabolism. More thyroid hormone means more mitochondrial activity, more ATP production, and a higher resting metabolic rate. Less thyroid hormone slows everything down. This is why thyroid disorders can have such a profound effect on weight, energy levels, and body temperature. And it doesn't stop there. Mitochondria even help manage appetite-related signals. Certain byproducts of mitochondrial metabolism influence how full or hungry you feel. Some of these chemical messengers interact with parts of the brain that regulate feeding behavior. So in a very real sense, your mitochondria can affect not just how you burn energy, but whether you feel like reaching for that next cookie. Let's not forget the role of mitochondria in exercise. When you move your body, whether it's walking the dog or running a marathon, your cells need more ATP. Mitochondria respond by increasing respiration. Over time, with regular physical activity, your body actually builds more mitochondria in your muscle cells. This process is called mitochondrial biogenesis, and it helps explain why trained athletes have such incredible endurance. Their cells are packed with extra power plants, ready to meet the demand. And here's a fun fact. The benefits of exercise go far beyond muscles. Studies have shown that regular physical activity can also improve mitochondrial function in the brain, the liver, and even fat tissue. It's one of the reasons exercise is so good for your overall health, not just because of the calories burned, but because it tunes up your cellular engines. Of course, like any good power plant, mitochondria can face issues, when the demand for energy exceeds their ability to supply it, or when their function becomes impaired, problems can start to pile up. One consequence is the overproduction of reactive oxygen species, chemicals that can damage proteins, lipids, and even DNA. This oxidative stress is a natural part of metabolism, but if not properly managed, it can contribute to aging and chronic diseases. Fortunately, your cells come equipped with antioxidant defenses to help neutralize these reactive molecules. And mitochondria themselves play a role in regulating this balance, dialing back activity when needed or triggering cellular responses to protect against damage. It's all part of the mitochondria's broader role as managers of metabolic health. They don't just generate energy, they monitor fuel supplies, respond to hormonal signals, regulate temperature, coordinate with the immune system, and help determine how your body handles stress. In a way, they're the ultimate multitaskers, tiny conductors in the orchestra of life, making sure every section is in sync and on tempo. And they're adaptable, constantly adjusting their output and priorities to match what your body is doing, what you're eating, how you're moving, and how you're feeling. So the next time you hear someone talk about metabolism, remember, it's not just a number or a buzzword, it's a symphony of activity, orchestrated by billions of tiny mitochondria, working around the clock to keep you balanced, warm, nourished, and alive. Whether you're sipping tea on a chilly morning or sprinting to catch a bus, your mitochondria are right there with you, quietly doing the work of life, one molecule at a time. Let's talk about something a little smoky, something that happens every time your mitochondria go about their business of making energy. Because for all their brilliance and biochemical elegance, mitochondria are not perfect. Like any good engine, they produce a bit of exhaust, a few sparks, a little cellular smoke. And in the case of mitochondria, that smoke comes in the form of reactive oxygen species, often abbreviated as ROS. Now, reactive oxygen species might sound like a futuristic rock band, but they're really just chemically reactive molecules containing oxygen. Think of them as oxygen with a wild side. They include things like superoxide anions, hydrogen peroxide, and hydroxyl radicals. These molecules are created naturally as byproducts of cellular respiration, especially during the final stages when electrons are being shuttled down the electron transport chain. In a perfect world, every electron would glide down the chain smoothly, combine with oxygen, and form water. But electrons are twitchy little things. Occasionally, one slips out of the process early and reacts with oxygen in a way that creates a reactive oxygen species. It's a bit like spilling gasoline while filling your car. It's not ideal, but it happens. And just like gasoline, ROS are potent. They're highly reactive, meaning they can easily interact with other molecules in the cell. Sometimes that's useful, other times not so much. When ROS come into contact with important cellular components, like proteins, lipids, or DNA, they can cause damage. This process is known as oxidative stress. It's like a slow form of molecular rusting. The structures of the cell begin to wear down, function less efficiently, and become more prone to errors. Over time, this contributes to aging and to the development of various diseases, including cancer, neurodegenerative disorders, and cardiovascular problems. But before we start villainizing reactive oxygen species too harshly, it's important to know that they're not always the bad guys. In fact, in small amounts, ROS are actually incredibly useful. They act as signaling molecules, helping to regulate processes like immune responses, cell growth, and even communication between organelles. They can trigger protective responses, stimulate repair mechanisms, and help the body adapt to stress. A little bit of ROS is like a fire drill. It gets everyone moving, strengthens resilience, and ensures that the system can handle bigger challenges later on. The trouble comes when there's too much ROS and not enough control. That's where antioxidants come in. These are molecules that neutralize reactive oxygen species, preventing them from causing cellular damage. Some antioxidants are produced by your body, such as glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and catalase. Others come from your diet, vitamins like C and E, as well as compounds found in fruits, vegetables, tea, and even chocolate. Antioxidants work by donating electrons to reactive oxygen species, stabilizing them without becoming reactive themselves. It's a kind of molecular diplomacy, calming the hot-headed radicals before they do anything rash. Your cells are constantly juggling ROS and antioxidants, trying to maintain balance. This balancing act is sometimes called redox homeostasis. When it's working well, the system is in harmony. Enough ROS to keep things responsive, enough antioxidants to keep things safe. But when the balance tips too far in either direction, problems can arise. If ROS levels are too high, oxidative stress kicks in. This can damage mitochondrial DNA, which is especially vulnerable because it's located right near the electron transport chain and lacks some of the protective mechanisms that nuclear DNA enjoys. Damaged mitochondrial DNA can lead to malfunctioning proteins, which in turn impairs energy production, which creates even more ROS. It's a vicious cycle. On the other hand, if ROS levels are too low, important signaling pathways might be disrupted. Cells might become sluggish in responding to stress, less adaptable, and more vulnerable to infection or injury. So while it's tempting to think of antioxidants as universally good, the truth is more nuanced. Like most things in biology, it's about balance. This is one reason why high-dose antioxidant supplements have produced mixed results in studies. In some cases, they may blunt beneficial responses, such as the improvements in mitochondrial function that come from exercise. During physical activity, your mitochondria produce more ROS. This triggers the body to strengthen its antioxidant defenses and improve mitochondrial efficiency. But if you take large amounts of antioxidants before or after a workout, you might interfere with that adaptation. It's like turning off the fire alarm before the drill can teach anyone what to do. That said, a diet rich in natural antioxidants, especially from colourful fruits and vegetables, remains one of the best ways to support healthy mitochondrial function. These foods provide not just isolated vitamins, but a symphony of compounds that work together in subtle and complex ways. Blueberries, spinach, green tea, turmeric. They're all full of polyphenols and phytochemicals that help your mitochondria stay balanced and resilient. Now, mitochondria are not helpless victims in all this. They've evolved ways to protect themselves from oxidative damage. They can increase the production of antioxidant enzymes, activate repair pathways, and even initiate self-cleaning processes when things go wrong. One of these is mitophagy, which is the selective removal of damaged mitochondria. If a mitochondrion becomes too inefficient or starts leaking too many aros, the cell can tag it for recycling, breaking it down and using the parts to build new, healthy mitochondria. It's a bit like a car that's been in one too many fender benders. Rather than trying to patch it up endlessly, sometimes it's better to send it to the scrapyard and invest in something newer and safer. This constant cycle of damage and renewal is one reason why mitochondrial health is so closely linked to aging. As we get older, our ability to manage oxidative stress tends to decline. Mitochondria become less efficient, more prone to leakage, and less able to repair themselves. The accumulation of oxidative damage is one of the hallmarks of aging, and it's thought to play a role in age-related diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and certain types of cancer. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. Regular exercise, good nutrition, adequate sleep, and stress management can all improve mitochondrial function and help maintain the delicate balance of oxidative stress. Even moderate physical activity has been shown to upregulate antioxidant defenses and increase the production of new mitochondria. And getting enough sleep allows your cells to perform maintenance and cleanup operations, restoring redox balance and preparing you for the next day. Interestingly, some researchers are exploring the idea of hormesis, the concept that small doses of stress can actually make you stronger. When your mitochondria are exposed to mild oxidative stress, they may respond by becoming more robust, activating repair pathways, and increasing their resistance to future challenges. It's like weightlifting for your cells. That's one reason why practices like intermittent fasting, cold exposure, and exercise might have such powerful effects on health. They gently stress the mitochondria, prompting them to improve rather than fall apart. Of course, too much stress can overwhelm the system, so it's all about moderation. Your mitochondria don't want boot camp. They want thoughtful, well-timed challenges and plenty of support. So, the next time you hear someone talk about oxidative stress, don't picture a dramatic cellular meltdown. Instead, think of it as a balancing act. A little bit of fire keeps things warm, flexible, and alert. Too much, and you start burning the walls. Too little, and you're left in the cold. Your mitochondria are constantly navigating this line, adapting to your lifestyle, environment, and habits. They're not just passive batteries, they're dynamic, responsive, and surprisingly communicative. They know when to push harder, when to cool down, and when to call for reinforcements. And all of this is happening quietly, invisibly, while you go about your day. As you sit, breathe, and rest, your mitochondria are managing tiny sparks of energy, keeping your body in balance, and making sure that the fires of life stay just warm enough. Aging is one of those strange, universal experiences, something we all share but don't fully understand. It creeps in slowly, almost politely at first. A grey hair here, a laugh line there, a little more creaking when you get out of bed. And while we often joke about it or try to ignore it, aging is a deeply biological process, written into the very fabric of our cells. And, as it turns out, mitochondria have a front row seat to the whole thing. In fact, some scientists believe mitochondria play a starring role in aging. Not as the villains necessarily, but as the overworked power plants trying to keep everything running smoothly, while time quietly wears down their gears. It's called the mitochondrial theory of aging, and it's one of the leading explanations for why our cells, and therefore our bodies, gradually lose function as we get older. To understand how this theory works, let's start with what mitochondria do best: produce energy. Every day your mitochondria churn out the equivalent of your body weight in ATP, the little molecules that power everything from muscle contractions to brain activity. But that energy production doesn't come without consequences. As we've already seen, making ATP also creates reactive oxygen species, those pesky reactive molecules that can damage cells if not properly managed. When we're young and healthy, our cells have strong antioxidant defenses that keep this damage in check. Mitochondria are efficient, clean-burning machines, but over time, those defenses start to wear down. Damage begins to accumulate, particularly in the mitochondria themselves. And here's the kicker. Mitochondria are especially vulnerable because they're so close to the source of the problem. They sit right next to the electron transport chain where reactive oxygen species are born. It's like building your house next to a volcano. Beautiful view, but not the safest spot. Mitochondrial DNA is especially at risk. Unlike the DNA in your cell's nucleus, mitochondrial DNA is not protected by histones, the special proteins that help package and shield nuclear DNA. It's also not as rigorously repaired. That means when reactive oxygen species go rogue, mitochondrial DNA is more likely to get hit, more likely to suffer mutations, and less likely to be repaired correctly. These mutations can disrupt the proteins that mitochondria need to produce energy efficiently. As a result, damaged mitochondria start to produce less ATP and more reactive oxygen species, which in turn causes more damage. It's a self-reinforcing loop, like a small crack in a windshield that slowly spiderwebs out into a full-blown fracture. Over time, the cell accumulates dysfunctional mitochondria. These mitochondria are less efficient, more leaky, and more prone to triggering stress responses. They might even release signals that tell the cell it's time to shut down, entering a state known as senescence. Senescent cells are still alive, but they've stopped dividing and can begin to secrete inflammatory molecules that affect neighbouring cells. It's like a grumpy neighbour who never leaves the house but still manages to make the whole block feel unpleasant. As senescent cells build up, tissues lose their ability to repair themselves. Organs begin to function less efficiently. The skin loses elasticity. Muscles weaken. Memory fades. All the telltale signs of aging start to appear, and mitochondria are right there at the heart of it. But the story doesn't stop at wear and tear. Mitochondria also play a key role in signaling within the cell. They don't just react to damage, they help decide how the cell should respond to it. If a cell is too damaged, mitochondria can help trigger apoptosis or programmed cell death. This is a tidy, well-organized process where a cell effectively self-destructs to protect the larger organism. It's not violent or chaotic. It's more like quietly packing up and turning off the lights. In youth, apoptosis is essential. It helps shape tissues during development and removes damaged cells before they cause trouble. But with age, the balance can shift. Too much apoptosis, and healthy cells may be lost unnecessarily. Too little, and damaged cells may stick around longer than they should. Once again, mitochondria are the ones navigating that delicate decision-making process. There's also growing interest in how mitochondrial dysfunction contributes to specific age-related diseases. In Alzheimer's disease, for example, researchers have observed changes in mitochondrial structure and function long before cognitive symptoms appear. Similar patterns are seen in Parkinson's disease, where the neurons most affected are particularly reliant on healthy mitochondrial activity. In the heart, aging mitochondria may lead to reduced efficiency and increased vulnerability to stress, contributing to heart failure and other cardiovascular conditions. In muscles, mitochondrial decline is linked to sarcopenia, the gradual loss of muscle mass and strength. Even in the immune system, aging mitochondria may impair the ability of immune cells to respond effectively, making infections harder to fight and vaccines less effective, and it's as if every system in the body is quietly relying on these tiny engines to do their part, and when the engines falter, everything else begins to slow down. But there is good news too. While aging is inevitable, mitochondrial decline is not necessarily a one-way street. Lifestyle choices can have a significant impact on how well your mitochondria function as you age. Regular physical activity is one of the best ways to support mitochondrial health. Exercise promotes mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria, and improves their efficiency. It also enhances the body's ability to manage oxidative stress, reducing the buildup of reactive oxygen species. Even something as simple as walking regularly can make a measurable difference. Nutrition also plays a role. Diets rich in whole, unprocessed foods provide the vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants needed to support mitochondrial function. Certain nutrients like coenzyme Q10, B vitamins, and omega-3 fatty acids are especially important for energy metabolism and mitochondrial health. Sleep, too, is crucial. During sleep, the body performs much of its repair and maintenance work. Mitochondria get a chance to recover from the day's stresses, clear out damaged components, and prepare for the next cycle of energy production. Chronic sleep deprivation, on the other hand, can accelerate mitochondrial dysfunction and contribute to premature aging. Stress management is another important factor. Chronic psychological stress has been linked to increased production of reactive oxygen species and inflammation, both of which can harm mitochondria. Practices like meditation, yoga, and spending time in nature may not only soothe the mind, but also support healthier mitochondrial function. Some researchers are even exploring pharmaceutical or nutraceutical interventions that target mitochondria directly. These include compounds that may boost mitochondrial biogenesis, improve the electron transport chain's efficiency, or reduce oxidative damage. While many of these are still in the early stages of research, they represent a growing interest in addressing aging at its cellular roots. There's something both humbling and inspiring about the idea that aging is, at least in part, the story of tiny structures gradually losing their spark. It reminds us that the grand arc of life, its vitality, resilience, and the eventual slowing, can be traced down to the most microscopic levels. The mitochondria that powered your first breath are still with you now, powering your heartbeat, your thoughts, your quiet moments of reflection. And while we may not be able to stop the passage of time, we can walk alongside it more gracefully. By supporting our mitochondria through movement, nourishment, rest, and care, we honour the machinery that has served us faithfully since before we were even born. In the end, perhaps aging is less about breaking down and more about adapting, about finding new rhythms and appreciating the quiet, steady pulse of energy that continues, even as the world changes around us. The mitochondria may flicker and slow, but they do not give up easily, and neither do we. Picture your body as an enormous humming city. Each cell is like a self-contained neighborhood, working away with incredible coordination. Now imagine that in some of these neighborhoods, the power plants, the mitochondria, start to malfunction. The lights dim, machines slow, communications get garbled. And in the body, when mitochondria falter, things can get a lot more serious than a dim light bulb. This is the basic idea behind mitochondrial diseases, a group of rare but often severe disorders caused by problems in the mitochondria's ability to produce energy. At first glance, it might not seem like energy production could cause such trouble. After all, every part of your body uses energy, so wouldn't all cells be equally vulnerable? Strangely, no. Some tissues and organs are far more sensitive to energy loss than others. This includes your brain, your heart, your muscles, and your eyes. These parts of the body are like skyscrapers in our city analogy, tall, impressive, and extremely power-hungry. When the energy supply drops even slightly, they are the first to suffer. Mitochondrial diseases come in many forms, but they all share a common root: a disruption in the mitochondria's ability to generate ATP efficiently. Sometimes the cause is a mutation in the mitochondrial DNA itself. Other times, the mutation is found in the nuclear DNA that provides the proteins mitochondria rely on. Either way, the result is a breakdown in the energy machinery. One of the tricky aspects of mitochondrial diseases is that they are often inherited, but not always in predictable ways. Because mitochondria have their own DNA, and because mitochondrial DNA is passed down only from the mother, some mitochondrial diseases follow a maternal inheritance pattern. That means a mother with a mitochondrial DNA mutation can pass it on to all of her children, but only her daughters will pass it to the next generation. Sons can be affected, but they do not pass the mutation forward. On the other hand, when the mutations occur in nuclear DNA, remember, that's the DNA housed in the cell's nucleus inherited from both parents, the disease may follow autosomal dominant or recessive inheritance patterns. This makes diagnosing mitochondrial diseases a bit of a genetic jigsaw puzzle. Doctors and researchers have to consider both sets of DNA, both maternal and biparental inheritance, and often look at how symptoms show up across a family tree. And the symptoms, they can vary widely. That's one of the most challenging aspects of these conditions. Because mitochondria are everywhere in the body, and because different tissues rely on them to different degrees, mitochondrial diseases can present in many ways. Some people experience muscle weakness or fatigue. Others may have neurological symptoms like seizures, developmental delays, or problems with coordination. Some forms cause heart issues, vision or hearing loss, gastrointestinal problems, or even diabetes. One well-known example is a condition called MELAS, which stands for mitochondrial encephalomyopathy, lactic acidosis, and stroke-like episodes. It's a mouthful, but each word gives a clue about the symptoms. Encephalomyopathy refers to effects on the brain and muscles. Lactic acidosis happens when the body produces too much lactic acid, a sign that cells are relying more on inefficient energy production methods because mitochondria aren't pulling their weight. And stroke-like episodes describe sudden neurological events that resemble strokes but don't follow the typical patterns of blocked blood flow. Another condition is Lee syndrome, which usually appears in infancy or early childhood. It's a progressive neurological disorder that affects motor and cognitive development. Children with Lee syndrome may experience loss of motor skills, breathing difficulties, and eventually problems that affect vital functions. It's a heartbreaking illness, and like many mitochondrial diseases, it has no cure, only treatments that aim to manage symptoms and improve quality of life. There's also Kearns-Sayre syndrome, a rare condition that often begins before age 20 and typically involves eye problems, muscle weakness, and heart conduction defects. Or Pearson syndrome, which affects the bone marrow and pancreas. These diseases are rare, but their impact on individuals and families is profound. Despite their variety, mitochondrial diseases share some common traits. They often show up in early childhood, though some forms don't become apparent until adulthood. They tend to be progressive, meaning they worsen over time as more cells accumulate damage, and they're notoriously difficult to diagnose. Symptoms can mimic other conditions, and many patients go through years of testing before getting a clear answer. So how are these conditions diagnosed? Doctors typically begin with a careful medical history and physical exam. If a mitochondrial disorder is suspected, they may order blood tests to look for elevated lactate or alanine levels, byproducts of altered metabolism. Imaging studies like MRIs can show characteristic brain changes. Sometimes, a muscle biopsy is performed to examine mitochondrial function directly, looking for abnormalities in shape, number or enzyme activity. Genetic testing has become an increasingly important tool. By sequencing mitochondrial DNA and relevant nuclear genes, doctors can often identify the mutations responsible. This not only helps confirm a diagnosis, but can also guide treatment and inform family planning decisions. And what about treatment? This is where things get complicated. Because mitochondria are involved in so many essential processes, and because these diseases are caused by genetic mutations, there is currently no cure. However, there are treatments that can help manage symptoms and support mitochondrial function. These may include vitamins and supplements, particularly those involved in mitochondrial metabolism. Coenzyme Q10, for example, is often used because it plays a key role in the electron transport chain. L-carnitine, riboflavin and creatine are also commonly included in mitochondrial cocktails, though their effectiveness varies from person to person. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy can help address developmental and motor challenges. Anticonvulsants may be used to control seizures. Cardiac monitoring may be necessary for patients with heart involvement. Because mitochondrial diseases affect multiple systems, care is often coordinated by a team of specialists, neurologists, cardiologists, geneticists, and more. Emerging research offers hope. Scientists are exploring gene therapy approaches to correct mitochondrial mutations or replace faulty mitochondrial DNA. One technique under investigation is mitochondrial replacement therapy, which involves using healthy mitochondria from a donor egg to prevent transmission of mitochondrial DNA mutations. Though still experimental and ethically debated, these methods represent exciting possibilities for future generations. Stem cell research too is showing promise, as are therapies aimed at boosting mitochondrial biogenesis or enhancing the efficiency of the electron transport chain. While none of these are ready for routine clinical use, they underscore the growing recognition of mitochondria as a frontier in medicine. And beyond rare diseases, this research may have broader benefits, because mitochondrial dysfunction is linked to more common conditions, like diabetes, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. Studying mitochondrial diseases could help unlock insights into many different aspects of health and aging. It's a testament to the importance of these tiny structures. They may be small, but when they malfunction, the effects can be vast. Every mitochondrion is a miniature universe of biochemical reactions, each one critical to the health of the cell it powers. When they work well, they're invisible, quietly fueling life without complaint, but when they struggle, the consequences ripple across tissues, organs, and entire systems. So while mitochondrial diseases may be rare, the lessons they teach us are universal. They remind us how deeply interconnected our biology is, how even the smallest part can have the biggest impact, and how, with every breath we take, every movement we make, and every thought we form, we rely on the quiet, tireless work of our cellular engines. And for those living with mitochondrial disease, the journey can be difficult. But research is advancing, awareness is growing, and every day, scientists and doctors are learning more about how to support, treat, and someday even prevent these conditions. In the meantime, we continue to honour the resilience of the human body and the remarkable mitochondria that power it all. Let's take a moment to appreciate something we usually try not to think about: death. Not the big, dramatic kind involving scythes or cinematic slow-motion finales, but something much smaller, quieter, and vastly more common. Every single day, billions of cells in your body die. Not because they're being attacked or injured, but because they are supposed to. It's part of the plan. This process is called apoptosis, or programmed cell death. And it's one of the most important forms of biological housekeeping. And at the heart of this dignified cellular goodbye, you guessed it, mitochondria. It might sound odd to give mitochondria, the cell's energetic cheerleaders, the job of ending lives. But in biology, things are rarely one-dimensional. Mitochondria are not just providers of energy. They're also sensors, gatekeepers, and, when necessary, executioners. Like any good caretaker, they know when it's time to call it quits for the good of the whole. Apoptosis is not a random or chaotic process. It's tightly regulated, neat, and incredibly purposeful. Think of it like a retiring cell packing up its desk, shredding its files, recycling what it can and locking the door behind it. No inflammation, no damage to surrounding cells, just a quiet departure. So why do cells need to die in such an orderly way? There are a few very good reasons. During development, apoptosis helps shape tissues and organs. For example, when your hands were forming in the womb, they started out as paddle-like structures. Apoptosis removed the cells between your future fingers, sculpting the digits. Without this, we'd all have flippers instead of hands. Apoptosis also keeps cell populations in check. It ensures that damaged or dysfunctional cells don't linger around causing trouble. If a cell's DNA is too damaged to be repaired, or if it's infected by a virus, apoptosis steps in. This protects the organism as a whole. Better to lose a single compromised cell than risk it turning rogue or replicating errors. And when things go wrong with apoptosis, the consequences can be serious. Too little, and damaged cells might survive when they shouldn't, potentially leading to cancer. Too much, and healthy tissues can waste away, contributing to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. Now, how do mitochondria get involved in this delicate operation? They act as the central hub in the intrinsic pathway of apoptosis, also called the mitochondrial pathway. When a cell experiences stress, whether from DNA damage, oxidative overload, or a lack of survival signals, certain proteins begin to accumulate in the cell's cytoplasm. These proteins belong to a family known as the BCL2 family, and within that family there are both pro-apoptotic and anti-apoptotic members. Some are like the angels of life, others the quiet engineers of death. When pro-apoptotic signals outweigh the survival ones, a dramatic shift happens at the mitochondrial outer membrane. Specific proteins like BAX and BAC become activated and form pores in the outer membrane of the mitochondrion. These pores create openings that allow certain molecules from the mitochondrial intermembrane space to leak out into the cytoplasm. One of the most important of these molecules is cytochrome C. Under normal conditions, cytochrome C plays a key role in the electron transport chain, helping generate ATP, but once released into the cytoplasm, it takes on an entirely different role. Cytochrome C binds with other proteins to form a structure called the apoptosome. This is like a molecular tribunal. It activates enzymes called caspases, which go on to dismantle the cell from the inside out. These caspases are responsible for chopping up the cell's components, cleaving proteins, dismantling the nuclear envelope, breaking DNA into fragments. It's efficient, orderly, and leaves no mess behind. Phagocytic cells, like macrophages, then swoop in to clean up the debris. It's one of the most elegant forms of biological recycling in existence. Now, it's important to note that mitochondria don't act alone in all this. They receive and process input from all over the cell. They listen to stress signals, metabolic cues, damage reports, and more. They weigh the evidence carefully before flipping the switch. It's a decision that is not taken lightly because once apoptosis is initiated, there's no going back. It's a one-way ticket. Interestingly, the very process of aging we talked about earlier, especially the accumulation of dysfunctional mitochondria, can disrupt this balance. If mitochondria become damaged and leaky, they might accidentally trigger apoptosis in cells that otherwise would have continued functioning. Conversely, in aging or diseased tissues, some cells that ought to die become resistant to apoptosis, contributing to problems like cancer or chronic inflammation. There's also an entire field of cancer research focused on how cancer cells manage to sidestep apoptosis. One of the hallmarks of cancer is the ability of cells to resist programmed death. They ignore the usual signals, they deactivate caspases, they overexpress anti-apoptotic proteins like BCL2, shielding themselves from the mitochondrial whisper to let go. By hacking the system, they survive and multiply, causing tumours to grow unchecked. That's why some cancer treatments aim to reawaken the apoptotic machinery. Certain chemotherapy drugs and targeted therapies work by pushing mitochondria to open those channels and release cytochrome C. They try to tilt the balance back towards cell death, selectively in cancer cells, ideally sparing healthy ones. It's a fascinating tightrope walk, keeping apoptosis in check while also using it as a tool when needed. And mitochondria walk that rope with quiet confidence, adjusting their stance based on the needs of the organism, the stress of the moment, and the signals from the cellular crowd. But apoptosis isn't the only form of cell death out there. There are other more chaotic methods, like necrosis, which is messy, uncontrolled, and often results from acute injury or infection. When necrosis happens, the cell swells and bursts, spilling its contents and triggering inflammation. It's more like a building collapse than a planned demolition. Apoptosis, by contrast, is serene. The cell shrinks, condenses, and breaks apart in a tidy package. It doesn't trigger alarms or inflammation. It's biology's way of saying, "Thank you for your service. You may rest now." And at the heart of it all, mitochondria play their dual role, life giver and gatekeeper. They energize the cell when times are good. They monitor for signs of distress. And when the time comes, they guide the cell through its final graceful exit, ensuring the integrity of the whole organism is preserved. This duality is one of the most poetic aspects of mitochondrial biology. It's a reminder that in life, beginnings and endings are often deeply connected. The same structures that powered your very first heartbeat are also there years later, helping cells complete their journeys with dignity. In a way, mitochondria are like caretakers of time, sensing, deciding and balancing the needs of now against the consequences for later. They don't make their decisions based on drama or fear. They act with molecular wisdom, rooted in billions of years of evolutionary trial and error. So the next time you think about death, don't picture destruction. Picture a quiet decision made in the best interest of the whole. A whisper from a mitochondrion carrying out one final task so that life can continue in its vast, beautiful complexity. That too is part of their legacy. If mitochondria had a secret side gig, it would probably be working behind the scenes in just about every chronic illness you can think of. For such tiny, humble organelles, they have an impressively long resume when it comes to influencing disease. They're not always the cause, but they are often deeply entangled, either exacerbating symptoms, failing under pressure, or quietly nudging things in the wrong direction. And while mitochondrial diseases are rare, mitochondrial dysfunction is not. In fact, it shows up in some of the most common and widespread health conditions in the modern world. Let's start with type 2 diabetes, a condition that affects hundreds of millions of people worldwide. At first glance, diabetes is a problem with blood sugar regulation. Your body either doesn't produce enough insulin or becomes resistant to it, leading to chronically high levels of glucose in the bloodstream. But beneath that surface-level explanation lies a deeper layer of complexity, and that's where mitochondria come in. In healthy individuals, insulin acts like a key, unlocking the doors to cells and allowing glucose to enter, where it can be turned into energy. But in type 2 diabetes, cells become less responsive to insulin. They ignore the knock on the door. One contributing factor to this resistance is mitochondrial dysfunction. When mitochondria in muscle and fat cells aren't working properly, they can't use glucose efficiently. This leads to a buildup of fatty acids and other metabolic intermediates that interfere with insulin signaling. The mitochondria, overwhelmed and underperforming, can't keep up, and the entire system starts to falter. But the trouble doesn't end with glucose. Mitochondrial dysfunction also contributes to the oxidative stress seen in diabetes, damaging blood vessels, nerves and organs. It's one of the reasons why people with poorly controlled diabetes are at higher risk for complications like heart disease, kidney failure and neuropathy. In essence, mitochondria aren't just struggling with energy, they're inadvertently helping to stir the pot. Speaking of hearts, let's talk about cardiovascular disease. Your heart is an energy-demanding organ. It beats over 100,000 times a day, every day, from the moment you're born until the moment you die. To pull off this marathon performance, cardiac cells are packed with mitochondria, thousands of them per cell, generating the ATP needed to contract and relax without pause. When those mitochondria become damaged, the heart suffers. Reduced ATP production weakens cardiac output. Excessive reactive oxygen species can damage heart muscle cells and blood vessel linings. Mitochondrial DNA mutations have even been linked to some forms of cardiomyopathy, diseases of the heart muscle that can lead to heart failure. Interestingly, in the early stages of heart disease, the body often tries to compensate by increasing mitochondrial activity. But if the underlying problems aren't addressed, like high blood pressure, cholesterol buildup, or inflammation, those mitochondria eventually burn out. The result is a heart that struggles to keep up with the demands placed upon it, and the consequences can be life-threatening. Then there's the brain, another organ that's absolutely ravenous for energy. Your brain makes up only about 2% of your body weight, yet it consumes roughly 20% of your oxygen and energy. Every thought, memory and emotion is powered by neurons, and those neurons rely heavily on mitochondria. When mitochondria falter in the brain, the effects can be subtle at first, maybe a little brain fog, a bit of mental fatigue, but over time the consequences can become profound. In neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, mitochondrial dysfunction plays a central role. In Alzheimer's disease, for example, neurons show signs of mitochondrial failure long before symptoms like memory loss or confusion appear. Mitochondria in affected brains often produce less ATP, generate more reactive oxygen species, and struggle to maintain proper calcium levels. They may also have trouble moving along axons, the long projections of neurons that allow them to communicate. When mitochondria can't reach the areas where they're needed most, neurons start to suffer and eventually die. In Parkinson's disease, the story is similar, but centers around specific populations of neurons that produce dopamine. These dopamine-producing neurons are especially sensitive to mitochondrial defects. One well-studied genetic cause of Parkinson's involves mutations in genes that help maintain mitochondrial quality control. Without proper cleanup and repair, damaged mitochondria accumulate, triggering oxidative stress, cell death, and the familiar motor symptoms of Parkinson's: tremors, stiffness, and slow movement. Even in mental health disorders, mitochondria are starting to draw attention. Emerging research suggests that mitochondrial dysfunction might be linked to conditions like depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. While we're still learning about these connections, the basic idea is that when brain cells can't generate enough energy or manage stress effectively, it can affect mood, cognition, and behavior. Moving from the brain to the immune system, we find yet another arena where mitochondria are quietly influencing outcomes. Immune cells, like all other cells, rely on mitochondria for energy, but they also use mitochondria for communication and signaling. For instance, certain immune responses are triggered when mitochondrial DNA leaks into the cytoplasm, where it acts as a kind of danger signal. The immune system interprets it as a sign of infection or damage and ramps up inflammation. This is helpful when you're fighting off a virus, but when mitochondrial dysfunction leads to chronic low-level release of these signals, it can contribute to systemic inflammation. That kind of persistent, smouldering inflammation is thought to be at the root of many chronic diseases, including autoimmune conditions, metabolic syndrome, and even some cancers. Speaking of cancer, mitochondria are both heroes and villains in this story. On the one hand, they can help eliminate potentially cancerous cells by triggering apoptosis, programmed cell death. But cancer cells are notoriously good at dodging this fate. They often suppress mitochondrial pathways or reroute their metabolism to favour less efficient but faster energy production methods. This is known as the Warburg effect, where cancer cells prefer glycolysis even in the presence of oxygen. It's a clever way to generate the raw materials needed for rapid growth, but it's also a sign of mitochondrial involvement gone awry. Interestingly, some cancer therapies now aim to target mitochondrial metabolism directly. By restoring or reactivating normal mitochondrial function, researchers hope to resensitize cancer cells to apoptosis or disrupt their energy supply. It's a promising area of research, one that highlights just how central mitochondria are, not just in health, but in the clever trick cells use when things go wrong. Now, none of this means that mitochondria are responsible for every disease, or that fixing them is a magic cure-all. But it does mean that mitochondrial health is deeply connected to overall health. When mitochondria are functioning well, they support resilience, repair, and balance. When they struggle, other systems often suffer alongside them. The good news is that supporting your mitochondria doesn't require exotic interventions or expensive supplements. It's the same advice you've heard before, but now you know why it matters at the cellular level. Exercise regularly. Movement promotes mitochondrial biogenesis and enhances function. Eat a nutrient-rich diet full of whole foods, especially colourful fruits and vegetables that provide antioxidants and essential vitamins. Get enough sleep. Mitochondria do some of their best repair work while you're resting, and manage stress, not just for your peace of mind, but because chronic stress can impair mitochondrial function and increase oxidative damage. Mitochondria may be tiny, but they are mighty, and they're with you through it all. The ordinary, the extraordinary, the joyful, and the difficult. They don't ask for much, just a little movement, nourishment, and care. In return, they give you life, one molecule of energy at a time. So as you breathe, blink, and drift off into thought, Remember that these microscopic engines are humming away inside you, keeping the lights on. In sickness and in health, they are your quietest companions, hard at work in every cell, every moment, every beat of your heart. If you could peer into a single brain cell, just one lonely neuron sitting in the vast network of your mind, you would see something astonishing. It's not just the shape that would surprise you, with its branching dendrites and long axon reaching out like a tree searching for a handshake. It's what you'd find packed inside. Among the tiny molecular machines and shimmering proteins, there would be an impressive number of mitochondria. These cells are absolutely packed with them, as if they've received a memo from evolution saying, "You're going to need all the energy you can get." And it's true. The brain is, by far, one of the most energy-hungry organs in the body. It makes up only about 2% of your total body mass, but it gobbles up roughly 20% of your resting energy supply. That means at any given moment, 1 out of every 5 molecules of ATP being produced by your mitochondria is being used by your brain. Thinking, feeling, daydreaming, remembering where you parked your car, they all come at a cellular cost. This is why mitochondria are such a big deal in the world of neuroscience. They are not just passive power plants, they are active participants in the complex dance of neural activity. When a neuron fires an electrical impulse, that signal travels down the axon to the synapse, the little junction where it communicates with another neuron. And this whole process depends on ATP, the energy currency produced by mitochondria. That ATP powers the ion pumps that maintain the delicate balance of sodium and potassium across the cell membrane, allowing the neuron to fire again and again. It fuels the machinery that packages neurotransmitters into vesicles, those tiny molecular delivery trucks that cross the synaptic gap. It supports the recycling of used neurotransmitters and maintains the structural integrity of the neuron itself. In short, without mitochondria, brain cells would simply go dark. And this isn't just a matter of quantity, it's about timing, location and precision. Mitochondria in neurons are highly mobile. They move along tiny cellular tracks, shuttled by motor proteins to exactly where they're needed most. If a part of the neuron is particularly active, say, a synapse that's firing rapidly, mitochondria are sent there like a team of emergency electricians delivering a fresh supply of energy and tools. This dynamic positioning is crucial, especially during learning and memory formation. When you learn something new, your brain strengthens certain synaptic connections, a process called synaptic plasticity. This requires not only new proteins and structural changes, but also bursts of energy right at the site. Mitochondria help provide that energy, acting like local power stations wired into the most active areas of your neural network. There's also growing evidence that mitochondria help regulate calcium in neurons, and calcium is absolutely vital in brain signaling. During neurotransmission, calcium floods into the synapse, triggering the release of neurotransmitters. Mitochondria absorb some of this calcium to prevent overload, then release it back when needed. Too much calcium and you get cellular toxicity. Too little and communication falters. Mitochondria help keep the balance just right. All of this coordination is why mitochondrial dysfunction can have such profound effects on brain health. When neurons can't get enough energy, or when they're overwhelmed by oxidative stress, they begin to misfire. Communication between neurons becomes erratic, damage accumulates, and the symptoms that emerge can vary depending on which areas of the brain are most affected. In Alzheimer's disease, for example, some of the earliest changes observed in brain tissue involve mitochondria. Neurons start to lose mitochondrial mass and function. ATP production drops. Reactive oxygen species rise. Mitochondria become fragmented and stop moving properly, leaving energy-starved synapses unable to keep up with the demands of neural communication. It's like trying to run a city grid with flickering power stations and no maintenance crew. There's also evidence that amyloid beta, one of the hallmark proteins that builds up in Alzheimer's disease, interferes directly with mitochondrial function. It can lodge inside mitochondria, disrupt the electron transport chain, and promote even more oxidative damage. It's a vicious cycle, damaged mitochondria lead to more amyloid buildup, which damages mitochondria even further, and all the while, neurons quietly lose their ability to connect, respond, and remember. In Parkinson's disease, the story is similar but centered on different neurons, specifically the dopamine-producing cells in a region of the brain called the substantia nigra. These neurons are crucial for movement, and they rely heavily on mitochondrial energy. When mutations affect genes involved in mitochondrial quality control, such as PIN, K1 and Parkin, damaged mitochondria begin to accumulate instead of being recycled. These dysfunctional mitochondria release signals that trigger cell death, leading to the loss of dopamine and the tremors, rigidity, and slowed movements characteristic of Parkinson's. Even mood disorders are showing signs of mitochondrial involvement. In depression and bipolar disorder, studies have found alterations in mitochondrial number, structure, and energy production. While the exact mechanisms are still being uncovered, the idea is that impaired energy metabolism in key brain regions could influence how neurons fire, how networks communicate, and how the brain responds to stress and emotion. And stress itself? That has a mitochondrial dimension too. Chronic stress floods the brain with cortisol and other hormones that, over time, can damage mitochondrial DNA and reduce energy efficiency. It also increases the production of reactive oxygen species, which can overwhelm antioxidant defenses and lead to neuroinflammation. It's one reason why long-term stress isn't just exhausting emotionally. It's exhausting at the cellular level. Of course, the relationship between mitochondria and the brain is not all doom and gloom. The brain is remarkably plastic, and mitochondria are surprisingly adaptable. In fact, many of the things that support brain health also support mitochondrial function. Exercise, for example, has been shown to increase mitochondrial biogenesis in the brain. That means your neurons build more mitochondria to meet increased energy demands. Exercise also enhances the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which helps neurons grow and form new connections. The result is a brain that is more resilient, more flexible, and better powered. Sleep is another critical factor. During deep sleep, your brain clears out metabolic waste products, including some that can damage mitochondria if left to linger. It also performs mitochondrial maintenance, repairing oxidative damage and recalibrating energy production for the day ahead. That groggy feeling after a sleepless night? It's not just mental fog, it's your neurons running low on ATP, struggling to keep up. Nutrition, too, plays a major role. Your brain loves glucose, but it also benefits from healthy fats, especially omega-3s found in fish and nuts. These fats are important for building mitochondrial membranes and supporting neuron structure. Antioxidants from fruits, vegetables, and spices like turmeric can help counteract oxidative stress and protect mitochondrial DNA. And then there's mindfulness, practices like meditation, deep breathing, and spending time in nature. These activities have been shown to reduce stress hormone levels, improve mood, and even enhance mitochondrial function. It's a wonderful example of how mental and physical health are intertwined, all the way down to the organelles. Mitochondria and the brain are partners in a very complex dance. One provides the energy, the other directs the moves. When the rhythm is right, the brain thrives, thinking clearly, feeling deeply, remembering richly. When that rhythm falters, when mitochondria can't keep up, the entire performance begins to wobble. But the beauty of it is this: every healthy habit, every nourishing choice, every moment of rest or movement or laughter, it all supports the dance. It helps keep the mitochondria in your brain flexible, fueled, and ready to respond. So the next time you find yourself marveling at a thought, recalling a memory, or drifting into a dream, remember the quiet engines behind the scenes. Your mitochondria are there, lighting up synapses, fueling neurons, and holding up the entire stage on which your mind performs, and that, in itself, is a little bit magical. Imagine for a moment that your mitochondria are small, incredibly picky houseplants. They need just the right amount of light, a bit of fresh air, and definitely no overwatering. But instead of sunlight and soil, what these miniature energy factories really crave are healthy habits. Things like regular movement, clean fuel, and a bit of peace and quiet. When treated well, mitochondria thrive. They multiply, they get stronger, and they churn out energy like nobody's business. But when neglected, they get sluggish, leaky, and a little melodramatic. So what exactly do your mitochondria like? It turns out, quite a lot of what makes you feel better on the outside also helps them function better on the inside. One of their absolute favourite things, for starters, is movement. And not just the dramatic kind involving treadmills and gym memberships. Even a brisk walk around the block, a little yoga on the living room floor, or a dance in your kitchen to a song you love can be enough to make your mitochondria perk up and say, yes, that's the stuff. When you move your body, your cells respond by increasing their demand for energy. And your mitochondria don't just sit back and complain, they step up. They replicate, they get more efficient. This process is known as mitochondrial biogenesis, and it's your body's way of upgrading its energy production system to meet increased demands. It's kind of like your cellular version of getting promoted for doing a great job under pressure. The result? More energy, better stamina, and improved resilience to stress and fatigue. Exercise doesn't just make your mitochondria more numerous, it makes them better. Studies show that physical activity improves the efficiency of the electron transport chain, reduces oxidative stress, and enhances the ability of mitochondria to handle fluctuations in energy demand. It also boosts the activity of key enzymes involved in respiration and increases the production of antioxidant defenses. In short, it's like sending your mitochondria to a luxury spa retreat that also offers strength training. And the benefits don't stop at your muscles. Regular movement supports mitochondrial health in your heart, liver, brain, and even your immune system. It helps balance hormones, regulates blood sugar, and lowers inflammation. If mitochondria could write thank you notes, they'd be sending one after every workout, even the short ones. Another thing mitochondria really appreciate is variety. While any movement is good, a mix of activities seems to be best. Aerobic exercise like walking, swimming, or cycling increases oxygen delivery and promotes endurance. Resistance training helps build muscle mass and enhances mitochondrial density and skeletal muscle. And interval training, alternating periods of high and low intensity, can dramatically increase mitochondrial capacity in a relatively short amount of time. Now what about rest? Surely mitochondria like a break now and then. They do, but not the kind of rest that involves long hours of sitting still and scrolling through your phone. What they truly enjoy is quality sleep. Sleep is when your body performs a lot of its internal housekeeping. Damaged mitochondria are tagged and recycled, new ones are produced, and oxidative damage is repaired. If you skimp on sleep, those processes don't happen as efficiently, and your energy systems start to wobble. You might feel foggy, tired, or cranky. Not because you didn't drink enough coffee, but because your mitochondria are still catching up from the night before. Consistent, restful sleep helps regulate mitochondrial gene expression and supports healthy rhythms in energy production. So even if life gets busy, prioritizing sleep is like tucking your mitochondria in under a weighted blanket with a hot water bottle and a lullaby. They love it. Food, of course, plays a starring role in mitochondrial care. Think of food as the raw material your mitochondria use to make energy. The better the material, the better the energy output. While mitochondria are impressively flexible, they can use carbohydrates, fats, and even proteins for fuel. Some fuels are cleaner and more sustainable than others. Whole, nutrient-dense foods are your best bet. Complex carbohydrates like oats, quinoa, and sweet potatoes provide steady glucose without overwhelming your system. Healthy fats, especially omega-3 fatty acids from fish, flax seeds, and walnuts, help build mitochondrial membranes and reduce inflammation. Lean proteins supply amino acids for repair and maintenance. And don't forget the colourful plant foods. Berries, leafy greens, and bright vegetables are packed with antioxidants and polyphenols that protect your mitochondria from oxidative stress. It's also worth mentioning that certain nutrients are especially important for mitochondrial function. These include coenzyme Q10, which helps shuttle electrons through the electron transport chain, as well as B vitamins, magnesium, alpha-lipoic acid, and carnitine. You don't necessarily need to take them in supplement form, many are found in a balanced diet, but being mindful of these micronutrients can help support your mitochondrial toolkit. Then there's the timing of eating, which is an area of growing interest. Intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating, and other strategies that involve periods of not eating appear to have some intriguing effects on mitochondrial health. When you fast, your body shifts into a different metabolic mode. It relies more on fat for fuel, increases ketone production, and activates cellular stress responses that promote repair and resilience. One such process is called mitophagy, which is essentially a recycling program for old or damaged mitochondria. During times of low energy intake, the body clears out its weakest mitochondria and makes way for new, healthier ones. It's like spring cleaning for your cells. Out with the tired, inefficient power plants, in with the sparkling new models. Of course, fasting isn't for everyone, and it should be approached thoughtfully, especially if you have underlying health conditions. But even modest changes like avoiding late-night snacking or giving your digestive system a break between meals can help support mitochondrial rhythms. Stress, on the other hand, is a bit more complicated. A little bit of stress can actually be good for your mitochondria. It's called hormesis, and it's the idea that mild stresses, like exercise, fasting, or cold exposure, can trigger adaptive responses that make your cells stronger. But chronic, unrelenting stress, that's a different story. When you're under constant psychological stress, your body releases cortisol and other stress hormones that, over time, can damage mitochondria. These hormones increase oxidative stress, disrupt mitochondrial signaling, and reduce energy efficiency. They also interfere with sleep, digestion, and immune function, all of which indirectly affect mitochondrial health. That's why stress management isn't just good for your mental health, it's mitochondrial medicine. Practices like mindfulness meditation, deep breathing, Tai Chi, and spending time in nature have all been shown to reduce cortisol levels and support mitochondrial function. Even something as simple as taking a few slow breaths before a meal or stepping outside for a bit of sunlight can make a difference. Let's not forget about environmental exposures. Mitochondria are sensitive creatures, and they don't love being bathed in toxins. Pesticides, air pollutants, heavy metals, and some industrial chemicals can interfere with mitochondrial enzymes and increase oxidative damage. While it's impossible to avoid all toxins, you can reduce your exposure by choosing clean foods, using safer personal care products, and keeping your indoor air fresh and clean. Hydration is another easy win. Water is essential for every metabolic process, including those that happen inside mitochondria. Dehydration slows down enzyme activity, disrupts electrolyte balance, and increases fatigue. So drink up. Your mitochondria will thank you. What's amazing is how all these pieces come together. Exercise stimulates mitochondria to grow. Sleep helps them recover. Nutrient-rich food fuels them. Mindful stress reduction calms them. And together, these habits create a kind of symphony, one where each note supports the others in keeping your energy steady, your mind sharp, and your body resilient. You don't need to be perfect. Even small, consistent choices add up. A short walk instead of a nap you didn't really want. A colourful meal instead of something out of a vending machine. A deep breath before a stressful phone call. All of these are messages to your mitochondria. You're supported, you're cared for, and you're free to do your best work. They may be microscopic, but they respond beautifully to a little love and attention. After all, your mitochondria have been powering you from the very beginning, through every heartbeat, every thought, every deep sigh. Taking care of them is really just another way of taking care of yourself, and that, as it turns out, might be one of the most energizing decisions you can make. Picture a lazy Saturday morning. You're curled up in bed, sun spilling through the curtains, maybe sipping something warm and wondering if you should get up or just enjoy the bliss of doing absolutely nothing. Your body is calm, your mind is quiet, but deep within, something remarkable is still going on. Even in this moment of stillness, your mitochondria are busy, breathing, calculating, adapting. They're not just cranking out ATP like little machines, they're talking, they're listening, they're making decisions, because mitochondria aren't just power plants, they're central command hubs, influencing far more than just energy production. One of the most exciting discoveries of the last few decades is that mitochondria are key players in cellular signaling. They don't simply respond to what's happening in the cell, they also help shape what happens next. They send out molecular messages, regulate gene expression, influence how cells grow and divide, and even communicate with the immune system. They're like tiny biochemical diplomats with a surprisingly big say in how your body functions. Let's start with one of the most fundamental aspects of their communication: reactive oxygen species, or ROS. Yes, we've talked about them before, those reactive byproducts of energy production that can cause damage when levels get too high. But they're not just waste products. In small, carefully managed doses, ROS act as signaling molecules. They help regulate everything from inflammation to insulin sensitivity. They tell the cell when to grow, when to repair, and when to pause. It's a bit like fire, dangerous when uncontrolled, but incredibly useful in the right place, at the right time, and in the right amount. Mitochondria release ROS intentionally in response to certain stimuli. For instance, when you exercise, the temporary rise in ROS helps trigger adaptive responses that make your cells stronger. It tells your body, hey, we're doing something challenging here, let's reinforce the system. This triggers a cascade of responses. Antioxidant enzymes are upregulated, new mitochondria are built, and old ones are recycled. It's one of the reasons why moderate stress like exercise or fasting can be so beneficial. Mitochondria are essentially using ROS as a whisper, just loud enough to get your attention, but not enough to burn down the house. Then there's calcium signaling. Calcium isn't just important for strong bones and teeth, it also acts as a messenger inside your cells. Mitochondria help regulate calcium levels by absorbing it when it surges and releasing it when it's needed. This buffering ability is critical in cells like neurons and muscle fibers, where calcium plays a role in communication and contraction. Too much calcium, and you get toxicity. Too little, and the cell doesn't respond properly. Mitochondria help keep the balance just right. But perhaps one of the most surprising ways mitochondria participate in signaling is by communicating with the nucleus, the part of the cell that holds the majority of your DNA. This back-and-forth dialogue is known as retrograde signaling. When mitochondria are under stress or need help, they can send signals that change how genes are expressed in the nucleus. They might upregulate repair enzymes, tweak metabolic pathways, or even alter how quickly a cell divides. This kind of communication is especially important in times of stress. If mitochondria sense that something's wrong, say, a spike in oxidative stress or a drop in energy, they can essentially press a cellular panic button. The nucleus then responds by activating protective genes. This process helps the cell adapt, repair itself, and survive. It's like getting a status report from the engine room that prompts the captain to change course. In fact, mitochondrial signals can influence gene expression in ways that affect the entire organism. Studies in animals have shown that changes in mitochondrial function in one tissue, like muscle, can trigger systemic responses that affect metabolism in other tissues, like the liver or brain. Mitochondria in your biceps could, theoretically, be sending messages that influence how your neurons behave. It's a reminder that the body isn't just a collection of isolated parts, it's a tightly connected network, with mitochondria acting as one of the main lines of communication. There's also a growing appreciation for mitochondria's role in immune system signaling. When a cell is infected by a virus or suffers damage, mitochondria can release certain molecules, like mitochondrial DNA or peptides, that act as distress signals. These molecules are picked up by the immune system as signs of trouble. Some of these responses are helpful, alerting immune cells to infections or injury. But if mitochondrial signals are released inappropriately, they can contribute to chronic inflammation or autoimmune reactions. It's fascinating and a little eerie how mitochondria have managed to take on so many roles beyond energy. They influence hormone signaling, regulate stem cell differentiation, and help determine the fate of developing cells. They're involved in the aging process, in cancer development, and in nearly every major physiological response. All the while, they continue their day job, making energy, without skipping a beat. So how do these signaling abilities relate to your everyday life? Well, let's say you're exposed to a new stressor. Maybe you get sick, or you start a new exercise routine, or your diet suddenly changes. Your mitochondria will sense that shift almost immediately. They'll adjust their respiration rate, tweak their ROS output, modulate calcium handling, and start sending messages to the rest of the cell. They're like first responders and messengers rolled into one, and if the stressor continues, they'll help your cells adapt over time, changing how your genes are expressed and how your body responds. This adaptability is one of the reasons why mitochondrial health is so critical to resilience. When mitochondria are healthy, they can handle stress and keep the system running smoothly. When they're compromised, their signaling becomes confused or exaggerated. You might experience fatigue, brain fog, immune dysregulation, or a general sense that your body isn't bouncing back the way it should. There's even evidence that mitochondria are involved in the so-called gut-brain axis, the communication pathway between your digestive system and your brain. Gut bacteria produce molecules that influence mitochondrial function, and mitochondria help regulate the gut's response to inflammation or infection. It's a two-way street of biochemical chatter, and mitochondria are right in the middle of the conversation. Another emerging field of research is exploring how mitochondria contribute to circadian rhythms, the internal clocks that govern when you sleep, eat, and produce hormones. Mitochondria don't just follow these rhythms passively, they help set them. Their energy output and ROS production fluctuate throughout the day, influencing and being influenced by the body's natural cycles. If your sleep schedule is off, your mitochondrial rhythms can be thrown out of sync, affecting everything from metabolism to mood. Even psychological well-being seems to have mitochondrial roots. Studies have found that people with major depressive disorder often have lower mitochondrial activity, higher oxidative stress, and signs of impaired mitochondrial signaling. This doesn't mean that mitochondria are solely responsible for mood, of course, but it does suggest that they play a supporting role, and when they're healthy, they help maintain the biochemical environment that supports stable, balanced emotional states. It's easy to forget that all of this is happening inside you right now. Even as you rest or sleep or do nothing at all, your mitochondria are whispering to the rest of your cells, adjusting, responding, negotiating. They are not just power sources, they are decision makers, strategists, storytellers, and perhaps the most beautiful part of this story is how it loops back to the basics. The same things that support mitochondrial energy production, like movement, sleep, connection, and nourishment, also help regulate their signaling. They keep the internal conversation calm, clear, and constructive. When your lifestyle is supportive, your mitochondria don't just produce more energy, they send better messages. Messages that say, we're safe, we're thriving, we can grow. So whether you're running a marathon or just sitting quietly, your mitochondria are at work, talking, listening, and shaping your experience from the inside out. And while they may be small, their voice carries across the entire symphony of your biology, ensuring that every note is in tune, or at least trying their best. Because even your mitochondria deserve a little grace. Think of your body as a bustling metropolis, alive with motion and colour and carefully timed activity. At the heart of this busy biological city lies a power grid, one that doesn't just keep the lights on, but helps manage everything from the water supply to public transport to emergency response. This grid isn't built from wires or concrete. It's made of mitochondria. These tiny organelles hum along in every cell, producing energy, responding to stress, and keeping things running smoothly. But like any city, sometimes things don't go according to plan. Maybe there's a blackout, a traffic jam, a fire alarm that won't stop ringing. And when something in the body goes wrong, the mitochondria are often right there at the scene, either as innocent bystanders, reluctant contributors, or in some cases unintentional instigators. Because while mitochondria are the engines of life, their dysfunction can be deeply involved in disease. And one of the most intriguing areas of this involvement is inflammation. Inflammation is your body's natural defense system, its way of dealing with threats, repairing damage, and keeping things orderly. It's a vital part of healing. If you twist an ankle or catch a virus, inflammation is what brings in the immune cells, clears out debris, and kickstarts the recovery process. It's like your body calling in a construction crew after a minor disaster. Noisy, a bit uncomfortable, but ultimately helpful. The problem is when the inflammation doesn't go away. Chronic inflammation is more like an overzealous security system that keeps blaring even when there's no real danger. And mitochondria, despite their best intentions, can be part of what triggers that constant alarm. Here's how it works. When mitochondria are functioning well, they help regulate the immune response. They produce just enough reactive oxygen species to serve as useful signals. They manage calcium levels and contribute to the energy needs of immune cells. But when they become damaged or dysfunctional, they start leaking signals, almost like a car engine sputtering and puffing out black smoke. One of the most important of these signals is mitochondrial DNA. Remember, mitochondria have their own DNA, separate from the cell's nuclear DNA. And under normal conditions, that mitochondrial DNA stays tucked away inside the mitochondrion, minding its own business. But when a mitochondrion gets damaged, its membrane can become permeable, and fragments of mitochondrial DNA can escape into the cytoplasm or even be released into the bloodstream. To your immune system, floating bits of mitochondrial DNA look suspiciously like viral invaders. That's because mitochondrial DNA shares a common ancestry with bacterial DNA. Same general structure, same circular shape, same unmethylated CpG sequences. So when immune cells detect it, they respond the way they would to an infection, by launching an inflammatory response. The mitochondria didn't mean to start a fight, they just got a little leaky. But now the immune system is gearing up for battle. This mistaken identity can lead to a cascade of activity. Immune receptors like toll-like receptor 9 and the NLRP3 inflammasome get activated. These are like fire alarms built into the cell. Once they're triggered, they set off a series of reactions that release inflammatory cytokines like interleukin-1 beta and interleukin-18. These cytokines spread the word to other cells, calling in reinforcements and amplifying the response. That's all well and good if there's an actual infection or injury to fight off. But when the source of the alarm is just a handful of struggling mitochondria, the response becomes less helpful and more harmful. The inflammation becomes chronic. It simmers, low and persistent, like a pot that never boils over but never gets turned off either. This low-grade inflammation has been linked to a whole range of chronic conditions: heart disease, type 2 diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases, autoimmune disorders, and even aging itself. In fact, there's a term for the age-related increase in systemic inflammation: inflammaging. It's as if the body over time becomes less able to distinguish between real threats and mitochondrial false alarms. And it's not just mitochondrial DNA causing problems. Damaged mitochondria can also release other molecules that act as danger-associated molecular patterns, or DAMPs. These include cardiolipin, ATP, and certain proteins that are normally hidden away inside healthy mitochondria. When these molecules are found where they shouldn't be, they too can trigger inflammation. But why do mitochondria get damaged in the first place? Part of it is just the nature of their job. Making energy is messy business. The electron transport chain generates reactive oxygen species, which over time can damage mitochondrial membranes, proteins, and DNA. Normally cells keep this in check with antioxidants and quality control systems. But when stress is high, or when those protective systems start to falter as they do with age, poor diet, or chronic illness, the damage accumulates. Cells do have ways to deal with dysfunctional mitochondria. They can repair them, or, if that fails, they can break them down through mitophagy, a kind of cellular recycling program. But when this system breaks down, damaged mitochondria stick around like malfunctioning machines on a factory floor. They leak, they sputter, and they keep triggering the immune system. Interestingly, the immune cells themselves rely heavily on mitochondria to determine their behaviour. When immune cells like macrophages are activated, their mitochondria shift from efficient energy production to a more rapid-fire, less efficient process called glycolysis. This metabolic switch helps support the immediate energy demands of inflammation, but also increases the production of reactive oxygen species and other inflammatory signals. Once again, mitochondria are both driving the car and honking the horn. Even the resolution of inflammation, the process of calming things down, is influenced by mitochondria. As inflammation winds down, mitochondria switch back to more efficient oxidative metabolism, supporting the return to cellular homeostasis. When this switch doesn't happen properly, the inflammation lingers. This mitochondrial link to inflammation is particularly relevant in autoimmune diseases like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and multiple sclerosis. In these conditions, the immune system attacks the body's own tissues, and mitochondrial signals appear to play a role in both the initiation and perpetuation of the attack. In lupus, for instance, high levels of circulating mitochondrial DNA have been observed, along with increased activation of immune pathways that normally respond to infections. It's like the mitochondria are waving little flags that accidentally say, "enemy here," even when there's no enemy to be found. Research into mitochondrial targeted therapies for inflammation is growing. Scientists are exploring antioxidants that specifically target mitochondria, compounds that enhance mitophagy, and even strategies to repair or replace damaged mitochondrial DNA. The idea is simple but powerful. If you can calm the mitochondria, you might be able to calm the immune system. Diet and lifestyle also play a major role in this equation. Anti-inflammatory foods like berries, fatty fish, leafy greens, nuts, and olive oil support mitochondrial health and reduce oxidative stress. Regular exercise improves mitochondrial efficiency and promotes the removal of damaged mitochondria. Good sleep and stress management support the hormonal balance and repair systems that mitochondria rely on. It's all connected. The mitochondria influence inflammation, and inflammation influences mitochondrial function. It's a feedback loop, and like any loop, it can either spiral downward or upward. A little care, a little attention, and that loop can become a virtuous cycle, where good habits build stronger mitochondria, which support calmer immune responses, which preserve health and function over time. It's easy to forget that inflammation, at its core, is not the enemy. It's a defense system, a healing response. But like any powerful system, it needs to be managed carefully. And mitochondria, in all their microscopic complexity, are central to that management. They're not just bystanders in the drama of inflammation, they're narrators, stagehands, and sometimes accidental arsonists. Understanding their role helps us appreciate just how interconnected our biology really is, and it gives us tools, not magic cures, but real practical ways to support balance, eat well, move often, rest deeply, breathe slowly. These are not just cliches, they are direct messages to your mitochondria. Signals that say, you're safe, you can repair, you can thrive. And when your mitochondria are thriving, your whole body is more resilient, more responsive, and more at peace. All from the quiet wisdom of the cell's tiniest powerhouses, still doing their part, even when all you're doing is enjoying a slow, quiet morning. Imagine you've been invited to tour a futuristic research lab, the kind that hums with soft lights and low, gentle beeps. There's glass everywhere, microscopes the size of dinner plates, and robotic arms gracefully moving petri dishes as though dancing to a silent song. At the very centre of the room, behind the most secure doors, lies the focus of the entire facility, mitochondria. Not just ordinary mitochondria though. We're talking engineered, edited, supercharged mitochondria, designed not only to understand disease but possibly to cure it. We've come a long way from calling mitochondria the powerhouse of the cell. That phrase, while catchy, barely scratches the surface of what these tiny organelles are capable of. And now, thanks to advances in science and technology, we're beginning to unlock their full potential, not just in understanding biology, but in actively shaping health, longevity, and maybe even human evolution itself. Let's start with gene therapy. One of the most groundbreaking areas in modern medicine is the idea of editing the genes inside cells to correct inherited diseases. Traditionally, gene therapy has focused on nuclear DNA, the big complex genome inside the nucleus of each cell. But now, scientists are also turning their attention to the smaller, circular DNA inside mitochondria. Mitochondrial DNA, though tiny compared to nuclear DNA, holds vital information. Mutations in mitochondrial genes can cause serious disorders, many of which affect organs with high energy demands like the brain, heart, and muscles. Until recently, these conditions were considered largely untreatable, but new technologies are changing that. One approach under investigation is mitochondrial gene editing. This involves using designer enzymes that can selectively target and modify mitochondrial DNA. The challenge here is that tools like CRISPR, which have revolutionized gene editing in the nucleus, don't work easily inside mitochondria. Mitochondria have tough membranes and don't naturally import RNA, which is a key component of CRISPR, so researchers have had to get creative. One promising strategy involves using a different kind of molecular scissors, called zinc finger nucleases, or TALENs, that can be programmed to find and snip faulty mitochondrial genes. By removing or deactivating the mutated DNA, these tools can potentially reduce the proportion of defective mitochondria in a cell. This technique has already shown success in lab models and holds promise for future therapies. Another frontier in mitochondrial medicine is mitochondrial replacement therapy, sometimes known in the media as three-parent IVF. This technique is designed to help women with defective mitochondrial DNA have healthy children. It involves taking the nuclear DNA from the mother's egg and inserting it into a donor egg that has healthy mitochondria but no nucleus. The resulting embryo contains genetic material from the mother and father, plus a tiny bit of mitochondrial DNA from the donor. It's like replacing the batteries in a flashlight while keeping the bulb and casing the same. This approach has been controversial both scientifically and ethically. It raises questions about identity, inheritance, and long-term effects that are still being debated. But from a biological standpoint, it's an extraordinary feat, swapping out faulty cellular engines for newer models before a child is even born. And this is just the beginning. Scientists are also working on ways to support mitochondrial function, using small molecules, peptides, and supplements that specifically target mitochondrial pathways. One area of interest is boosting the production of NAD+, a molecule that plays a critical role in mitochondrial energy production and repair. NAD+ levels decline with age, and increasing them through precursors like nicotinamide riboside or nicotinamide mononucleotide may help revitalize aging cells. Other compounds being studied include mitochondrial antioxidants, which are designed to penetrate the mitochondrial membranes and reduce oxidative stress at its source. Traditional antioxidants often struggle to reach the inner compartments of mitochondria, but new formulations like MitoQ or SKQ1 are tailored to do just that. They're like specialized maintenance crews equipped to clean up cellular smog before it causes trouble. Then there are the longevity molecules. Compounds like resveratrol, spermidine, and rapamycin are being explored for their potential to enhance mitochondrial efficiency and slow the aging process. These substances influence pathways related to mitochondrial biogenesis, autophagy, and stress resistance. They don't just extend life in lab animals, they often improve health span, the quality of those added years. and while human trials are still ongoing, the results so far are intriguing. Mitochondrial transplantation is another radical idea gaining traction. The concept is simple but bold. Take healthy mitochondria from a donor cell and introduce them into a cell with damaged or malfunctioning mitochondria. The new mitochondria can fuse with the old ones, share their components, and restore function. This technique has already been used experimentally in heart tissue, where damaged cells received mitochondrial infusions to improve recovery after a heart attack. It's like jump-starting a stalled car, not by replacing the whole engine, but by borrowing a spark from a working one. In parallel with medical applications, there's also growing interest in monitoring mitochondrial health as a marker of overall well-being. Advances in diagnostic technology now allow researchers to measure mitochondrial function in blood cells, muscles, and even individual organelles. These tests could one day help doctors catch early signs of disease, track aging, or personalize treatments based on a person's mitochondrial profile. It's a bit like checking your metabolic fingerprint. Are your mitochondria producing energy efficiently? Are they under stress? Are they aging gracefully or falling behind? The answers could inform everything from diet and exercise to medications and supplements. Beyond medicine, the future of mitochondrial research also touches on space travel, sports science, and biotechnology. Astronauts, for instance, face mitochondrial challenges due to radiation, microgravity, and confinement. NASA-funded research has shown that long-term spaceflight can disrupt mitochondrial function, contributing to fatigue, immune problems, and muscle loss. Understanding how to protect or restore mitochondria in space could be key to sending humans to Mars or keeping them healthy when they get there. Athletes too are beginning to pay closer attention to mitochondria. Endurance, recovery, and even mental focus are all linked to mitochondrial performance. Elite training programs are incorporating strategies to optimize mitochondrial health, from targeted nutrition to altitude simulation. It turns out that the secret to a better marathon time might not just be in your legs. It might be in your mitochondria's ability to make ATP efficiently under pressure. And in the realm of bioengineering, mitochondria are being explored for their potential in synthetic biology. Could we design artificial mitochondria that outperform the natural versions? Could we create hybrid cells with enhanced energy capacity? These are the kinds of questions being asked by scientists on the cutting edge of cellular innovation. Of course, with all this potential comes responsibility. Tinkering with mitochondria isn't just about boosting energy or fixing disease. It also affects how cells grow, divide, and die. The implications of mitochondrial therapies must be considered carefully, with attention to safety, equity, and long-term effects. As with any powerful technology, it's not just what we can do, it's what we should do. Still, the possibilities are thrilling. We're on the brink of a new era in medicine, one where treating disease doesn't just mean masking symptoms, but restoring function at the most fundamental levels of life. Mitochondria, once overlooked and underappreciated, are now recognized as key players in almost every aspect of health and aging. And with the tools of modern science, we can now begin to work with them. Not just observe, but participate in the process. So whether it's editing a gene, transplanting an organelle, or sipping a compound that boosts mitochondrial function, the future is bright and probably humming quietly with ATP. It's a future built not on flashy machines or futuristic implants, but on the quiet, persistent work of tiny structures that have been with us since the dawn of life. And perhaps that's the most poetic part of all, that the path forward might be found by looking inward, not into our dreams or our screens, but into the beating heart of our cells, where the mitochondria live, still working, still adapting, still waiting to show us what they can really do. And so, here we are, at the end of our long meandering journey through the inner universe of your cells, where mitochondria have quietly powered every thought, every breath, and every blink since before you were born. They've taken us from ancient oceans to the cutting edge of genetic medicine, from the soft pulse of a resting heartbeat to the electrifying chaos of a firing neuron. They are our microscopic companions, our tireless engines, our storytellers in strands of DNA and flickers of energy. It's strange to think that something so small, something invisible to the naked eye, could have such an outsized role in the story of your life. But that's the beauty of biology. The deeper you look, the more you realize how many wonders are hiding in plain sight, or, in this case, inside you. Now let's circle back to those gentle questions from the beginning, the ones meant to ease you in, to remind you of the world beyond your thoughts. So, where are you listening from? What time is it there? Is it morning with the sun rising gently outside your window? Or is it late at night, the world soft and still, the day folding itself quietly away? More importantly, how are you feeling now? A little more curious, perhaps? A little more in awe of the silent symphony playing inside your cells? I hope that if this video kept you awake, it was only because you were too interested to drift off. But if you've already slipped into sleep, then I hope it's the kind of deep, restorative rest that lets your mitochondria do what they do best: repair, renew, and prepare you for another day of being brilliantly biologically alive. Thank you for spending this time with me here on The Sleepy Scientist. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, or sharing where you're watching from. I'd love to know what time it is in your corner of the world. Until next time, rest well, breathe deeply, and remember, inside you, there's a whole universe of energy just waiting to be appreciated.